Right, so it looks like Labour's Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has just had her Liz Truss photo shoot moment, having unwisely agreed to be photographed in what looked like the tiled surrounds of a public toilet, just less graffiti and water on the floor. But this was all part of a puff piece in the rabidly Tory-supporting Daily Telegraph, which on its own should sound alarm bells, which is entitled by a quote from Reeves saying, "My mum showed me how to balance the books from the kitchen table." Well, if that is how you plan to balance the nation's books, then we're all in a deep, deep pile of trouble. But as this article demonstrates, if she's happy to run to the Tory press, if she's happy to continue to perpetuate the decades-old Tory lie that the national budget is like a household budget, then we're very much in the territory of if it walks like a Tory and quacks like a Tory, then it's a Tory. Right, so Rachel Reeves, Labour's hypernasal, self-proclaimed Iron Chancellor, in waiting. Not quite there yet. Having dropped the Green Chancellor moniker at last, it would seem, given she cheerily binned Labour's £28 billion Green Prosperity Plan. Was, it would seem, more than happy to chat to the Tory graph all about herself, though she wasn't alone at the time, as at that moment she was being interviewed, she was again joined at the hip by Starmer himself. He does tend to need his hand held by somebody to get him through the day. But the feature here, this was all about the Tory graph selling Labour's red Tory values to Tory readers, something we know Starmer and co are more than happy to do, chasing those Tory votes as they are. Waste of time as we know that is. They'd rather stay at home and not vote at all than vote any way other than Tory, and this Tory government, corrupt as it is turning even them off. But anyway, it was just the massive dishonesty that you might expect from a Tory B team, as well as the associated photo shoot being utterly hilarious, not just because of what Reeves thought looked strong and stable, but what the public thought and have indeed done with said photos afterwards. The main one people have had fun with is this photo here, sitting in what very much looks like a lavatory, though the point she was trying to get at was that austerity is one of the reasons we're in the position we're in, and so the starkness of her surroundings and how austere that is was an analogy to what has happened to our country. And I looked at this and I thought, well, you've just axed your flagship green policy. You keep bleating you won't spend on this, won't spend on that. Starmer jokes in the article that he struggles to get plans signed off. Other shadow ministers, as they're drawing up their plans ahead of the election, are grumbling she keeps saying no to them. So if she won't fund anything, surely what we're looking at here is an example not just of what has happened so far with Tory austerity, but what's going to carry on and come to pass with her in charge as well. Sitting there in whatever that tiled surrounding was, Reeves was told would look good by somebody, and, well, she fell for it, clearly. The article apparently quotes another Labour source describing Reeves as terrifying. Well, she certainly looks like it, sat there as she is, appearing to be ready to announce child poverty reduction plans, apparently after having read Roald Dahl's The Witches. That seems to be the vibe she's going for there. She looks like she's in a nightclub loo charging for paper towels. I get that the Tory graph are trying to do something stylistic here, but I'm not sure abattoir chic is really a thing. And of course others have had fun too, the same toilet block look having come to the minds of others. Another thinks it looks like a morgue, mocking up a magazine with Reeves as stiff of the month and more. How can you not have fun with it? Posing and looking hard-nosed about things, that isn't an appealing trait to me. Not as someone we're hoping is going to invest in our economy, and despite putting the hard word on austerity, whilst looking all serious amidst a background that implies she's run out of bleach blocks for the urinals and is absolutely furious about it. And so her economic views, the actual intent of the article, comes out, and in true Tory graph fashion, have no bearing on reality, despite this very Tory paper trying to sell a Labour Chancellor to all of us. Just the fact she's in this paper should be, in and of itself, a massive turn-off to ordinary working-class people that Labour should be appealing to. She talks of her mother in this article, teaching her how to balance the books, and from that you'd imply some kind of poverty upbringing. She's the same generation as me, a few months younger, so we both grew up under Thatcher. That was our formative years, and yes, things were tough for many of us, but not her, because she was the daughter of teachers. They didn't have a bad income at that time. She did okay. She talks of them not having much spare cash. Okay, fine, but you had enough to get by on. You weren't like many other families up and down the country. My family, for example, unemployment went through the roof. When I was very young, my father was a foreman in a furniture factory. Good living, good wage. But he lost his job There's unemployment bit around the country, as it did in so many industries. He later got a job as a postman. He loved that job. He'd hate to see what has become a Royal Mail since. He didn't live to see it. But my upbringing, whilst Reeves has got lessons in balancing the books, something we all do anyway, regardless of income, because we all have to do it, my upbringing involved hiding from the milkman because we didn't have his money. I don't think Rachel Reeves was doing that. It meant going without. It's why so many of us of my generation, of ours, mine and Rachel Reeves's generation, are so hardened against Thatcherite policy. But she's not. Many of us have struggled to make ends meet our entire lives because we've grown up knowing nothing else than successive governments denying infrastructure the necessary investment and or flogging it off. So Reeves saying, oh, I learned how to balance the books from my mum, well, she was a teacher. I should hope she taught you something, but most parents taught the kids the same thing. They didn't believe that made them credible to run the national economy, however. Reeves, it has to be said, went on to be a banker, so arguably she knows better than most how the economy works. But by harking back to kitchen table economics, shows she's going to be just as dishonest about the economy and how it works as every other chancellor that has come before her in my lifetime at least has been. At the end of the day, the nation can print its own money. If we did that at the kitchen table, we'd be arrested for it. She, as Chancellor, will be in a position to create money and control taxation to act as a brake on inflation for that, but she won't commit to anything, it seems delighted to actually be axing stuff. She just bins stuff she decided is unaffordable, and frankly, we as a nation can't afford more penny-pinching governance. Whilst you know they'll find money for war or vanity projects and things that don't directly benefit us, because you know it's what they always do. We know they're going to do that. Who are the government or the economy supposed to work for, if not for us? It's also rank hypocrisy coming from Reeves, since she was one of 19 MPs in 2015 to have their parliamentary credit cards suspended for failing to show how spending on it was valid. At that time, she was all about being tougher on benefits than the Tories as the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, something many of us who have had to live under that system will never forgive and never forget what she said about people like me, like my family then, carers for disabled people as I am, as are multitudes of other people around the country, no less vulnerable. Tougher on benefits than the Tories. You have to appreciate the Work and Pension Secretary at that time was Ian Duncan Smith, Dr. Death himself, who incidentally also lost his credit card for the same thing. So she can talk about the Tories maxing out the nation's credit card all she likes. She knows a thing or two about that, it would appear, when it's for herself personally. But equally, there is no credit card for the nation. There's a magic money tree there instead. It's called the Bank of England. And Rachel Reeves, as Chancellor, should she get there, can go there and magic money out of thin air, because that is literally how the economy works, as long as taxation is taken and is sufficient to ensure inflation remains under control. When I said she used to be a banker, I neglected to mention that this is actually where she used to work, the Bank of bloody England. So she knows this is true. She knows how it all works. But equally, she was working there when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, and clearly didn't see that coming any more than she saw having her parliamentary access to public money stopped either. When they say there's no money, what they really mean is there's no political will. Rachel Reeves's economic views, Thatcherite to the core as they apparently are, show she's forgotten her roots. She actually went to what was a fairly rough school, or actually was insulated from the same harm it did to so many other families growing up under Thatcher. What cultivated that hatred of the Tories, of Tory thinking, of Thatcherism amongst so many of us, never developed in her. Who inspired her into politics, incidentally? It was Tony Blair. She got the day off school to go door knocking in 1997, that's where she was. Says it all. So now she's just the latest in a long line of would-be chancellors lying about how our economy works, and she actually will keep doing no different to what has come before. The excuses will come that they can't because of the Tory damage, just as the Tories said it about Labour in 2010 when Labour said there's no money left on that stupid note that got left in the Treasury. And she'll do it all because she's all right Jack. Who cares if we continue to see no benefit in a country we keep being told is one of the richest on the planet once Starmer's Labour has had our vote and they don't need us anymore? She was allegedly one of the driving forces behind dropping that flagship £28 billion Greeners prosperity plan. There have been allegations, however, that she might have been bought off via climate change denial lobbying to do so. So an allegation that she is just one more politician that can be bought and paid for, it would appear, would absolutely be what we need, isn't it? Like a hole in the head. You can find out all about that in this video recommendation here, though, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next bit. Cheers, folks. Right, so as we move into March, it is already shaping up to be a very bad month for Israel on the propaganda front, as numerous narratives and lies have begun to collapse, not before time and deservedly so. The UN have not bought into Israel's claims over the recent Flour Massacre, the Israeli claims concerning UNWRA are falling to bits. Even the BBC is now blaming Israel specifically for the deaths of journalists in Gaza, as well as making claims against them for manipulating video footage. Are we going to see a meaningful shift in support for Israel shortly? Well, with the US and Genocide Joe still unashamedly supporting them, that's unlikely, but more and more they will find themselves and Israel isolated and on the wrong side of global opinion. Right, so Israel having a bad time of it on the public relations front will be music to the ears of those of us calling out the atrocities in Gaza. It won't call a ceasefire, it won't save lives lost overnight as Israel continue their genocide in Gaza, but it will put more pressure on them as they continue to lose public support, and on those still supporting them, such as the US and UK governments. Let's start with UNWRA, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, whose work in Gaza has for years been pretty much the difference between being able to survive there under Israeli occupation. Israel made unsubstantiated claims, you might recall, against this agency, who they hate because they support the Gazan people, amongst other Palestinians elsewhere. They made claims that UNWRA workers have aided Hamas in their actions on the night of October 7th, which were unsubstantiated, but their word, despite the many lies they had come out with over the last 5 months of genocide, the many times they have been widely debunked as lies already, were still good enough for some to withdraw their funding for UNWRA, which they rely on to exist. Well, it's been a month since these claims were made. The loss of funding from gullible nations, the US chiefly amongst them, their sap of a Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on record as saying the evidence was high quality, despite also admitting he hadn't seen it, and Israel have failed to pony up that evidence, backing up this assertion a month on. They still have presented no evidence for their claims. UNWRA had already stated they likely weren't going to survive beyond the end of February because of this defunding. So Israel's word had been good enough to endanger the crucial work of this organisation. Now, some nations like Ireland or Spain increased their funding to help stave off UNRWA's demise, and kudos to them for doing that. The loss in revenue that UNRWA had experienced being close to $500 million worth of funding. That's not easily replaceable, though. And Israel, seeing itself being able to get away with lying time after time with impunity, saw an opportunity to rid itself of an agency they've wanted gone since it first came into being in 1949. Well, the UN obviously had to investigate this. It's an accusation that had been made against a UN agency, after all. So an investigation was opened up by the OIOS, the UN Office of Internal Oversight Services. And although they have the initial report from Israel, and although they claim the investigation here is ongoing, they've also admitted that they've had no actual evidence from Israel at all to support their own initial report, and as such, the EU have resumed UNRWA funding, having just sent €50 million, with a further €32 million to follow. Hopefully this means UNRWA will start to get back on its feet, and hopefully more countries will start to wake up to the fact that Israel has lied to them again, they've been taken for fools, and to stop being so easily fooled by them going forwards. It's going to become more and more inexcusable that funding doesn't resume, because no evidence is going to come from Israel, because clearly they haven't got any. UNRWA didn't collapse before their lies did. Fortunately. Let's hope it still doesn't go on to collapse, though. Let's come to the so-called Flour Massacre next. Aid trucks entering northern Gaza for the first time in a month should have been cause for celebration, as Israel finally facilitated aid to areas that have not seen any in a heck of a long time. A good thing. Except Israel ended up opening fire on desperate people trying to get to the aid, killing over 100 people and injuring as many as 1,000, depending on which source you read. Israel, of course, claimed these people died because of overcrowding and being trampled. A stampede, they called it. This has been readily found to be false, not least of which by the BBC. And I have to say, as a YouTube channel that has been extremely critical of the BBC and is likely to remain so, I can find no criticism of the BBC here aimed in this one, because as much as we mock and jeer at the BBC and its quizzling biased coverage, and we laughed at the BBC when they announced their new Verify service, which they claim sought to debunk media dishonesty, because The BBC certainly does its fair share of that. But even they, after analysing footage of this event, this massacre, Flour Massacre, obtained from Al Jazeera, they had to conclude that Israel was lying when they said people stampeded the aid convoy, and that only warning shots were fired. And as aerial drone footage showed, drone footage from the IDF no less, the direction of travel of the convoy versus motionless figures on the ground shows these were not people who came at the convoy, but were to the sides of it. Any stampede was caused by people fleeing gun and tank fire. Here's what BBC Verify actually said. We have examined exclusive Al Jazeera video filmed close to that second location at the rear of the convoy, about half a kilometre south of the roundabout. Volleys of gunfire can be heard and people are seen scrambling over lorries and ducking behind vehicles. Red tracer rounds can be seen in the sky. Mahmoud Awadea said the Israeli vehicles had started firing at people when the aid arrived. Israelis purposefully fired at the men. They were trying to get near the trucks that had the flour, he said. They were fired at directly and prevented people to come near those killed. There have been reports of casualties being taken to several hospitals. Dr. Mohammed Salah, interim hospital manager at Al Orda Hospital, where many of the dead and injured were taken, told the BBC, Al Orda Hospital received around 176 injured people. 142 of these cases are bullet injuries, and the rest are from the stampede and broken limbs in the upper and lower body parts. This was one of the single most damning massacres seen in the last 5 months. Inexcusable killing of people coming out for aid the perpetrators themselves were delivering. Was this all a ruse to just lure people out into the north they didn't want there to take them out? Well, I certainly find that a more believable thought, don't you? Prosecutors have to come in relation to this now, along with many other incidences there. But it wasn't just the BBC taking note of such findings, because so have the UN Security Council. On the 1st of March, they held a vote blaming Israel for that massacre, for the Flour Massacre. Every single UN Security Council member voted for that motion of condemnation. Even the UK voted to condemn Israel for this. But one nation, of course, voted against it and therefore vetoed it, because of course the US did that, didn't they? Israel must be protected at all costs according to the administration of Genocide Joe, and there is no shifting that it seems right now on that. It's a shameless exercise that'll see Biden shifted out of the White House before he ever blames Israel for a damn thing. Still, the US aside, it's another lie that has collapsed. Coming back to the BBC, the CEO of the Beeb, Deborah Furness, in a show of solidarity with those journalists killed in Gaza, finally, it's about time they showed some of their now deceased colleagues abroad, killed for doing their jobs after all, killed despite wearing the word press blazoned across their bulletproof vests and flak jackets, because there has been a shambolic lack of that up until now. And she's signed a joint open letter on journalists in Gaza which reads, "We, the undersigned, stand united with Palestinian journalists in their call for safety, protection and the freedom to report. For nearly 5 months, journalists and media workers in Gaza, overwhelmingly the sole source of on-the-ground reporting from within the Palestinian territory, have been working in unprecedented conditions. At least 89 have been killed in the war, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. More journalists than have ever been killed in a single country over an entire year. These journalists, on whom the international news media and the international community rely for information about the situation inside Gaza, continue to report despite grave personal risk. They continue despite the loss of family, friends and colleagues, the destruction of homes and offices, constant displacement, communications blackouts and shortages of food and fuel. Journalists are civilians, and Israeli authorities must protect journalists as non-combatants according to international law. Those responsible for any violations of that long-standing protection should be held accountable. Attacks on journalists are also attacks on truth. We commit to championing the safety of journalists in Gaza, which is fundamental for the protection of press freedom everywhere." The letter has also been signed by the heads of other news organisations from around the world too, including ABC, CNN, Haaretz, Sky News, Financial Times, ITV News, Reuters, and more, some 50-odd signatories all told. Although the letter doesn't explicitly accuse Israel, it is very much Israel that does not want the world to know what is going on. The only side in this that has an incentive to gag the press. And as we've seen, this is happening in a lethal manner in unprecedented numbers. So the lies concerning UNWRA have fallen apart. The killing of journalists is being exposed and being widely condemned. And a food delivery massacre has very quickly been exposed as being Israel's fault as well. And condemned at the UN, even if the vote didn't pass, thanks to the US. More and more those on the side of Israel are going to find it harder and harder to continue justifying their allegiance to the state committing the genocide. And no amount of pointing to October 7th is going to cause people to ignore the following 5 months of atrocity that followed it, because in no way is it self-defense, and hasn't been now for some time. Israel and their determinedly resolute allies still are finding themselves more isolated, more on the wrong side of history going forwards. No amount of media spin excuses what we are seeing happening with our own eyes. In fact, more and more of the media are no longer prepared to do that. The many videos on social media, of course, which have horrified us, and now with even mainstream media speaking out, things can and will only get worse for Israel if they carry on like this. They continue to make claims that they cannot back up with evidence, if they continue to be proven time after time to be liars. Nobody's going to turn a blind eye to you anymore. And those political leaders that continue to do so hopefully won't be political leaders on that front for very much longer. Israel won't stop though, and certainly won't change. Despite the findings of the aftermath of the Flour Massacre, the Israeli security minister thinks we should be more concerned about the IDF soldiers who were involved on that day. Well, he would though, wouldn't he? Because he's a madman. But you can find out all about that story in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so we've become accustomed to the sight of Israel's military personnel on mainstream news bulletins, haven't we? Shoveling out propaganda that goes unquestioned in a similar manner to how a farmer might toss manure, and indeed it has stunk just as badly. Independent media, myself and plenty of others have covered numerous examples of these people turning up on our screens as they do, and talking about Hamas tunnels on our mainstream media that they found, and weapons caches hidden behind very magnetic MRI machines. How very curious. And laptops found in hospital clearly belonging to Hamas, with all their nefarious schemes against Israel laid out on the screen, despite them having keyboards printed in Hebrew and not Arabic, and with chargers curiously possessing Israeli serial numbers. The exposure of such poorly organised and blatant lies has made many of these spokespeople laughingstocks. Well, a large number of them have just quit their roles en masse. So who's going to spread your lies for you now then, B? Right, so this story's come as something of a surprise today, though predictably is not being widely covered, as 5 months of propagating propaganda hasn't implied those now all too familiar Israeli Defence Force military faces cropping up on our mainstream news regularly as they do, pointing to alleged evidence of Hamas atrocity and using civilian infrastructure as strongholds, were in any way unhappy with the roles they were filling, spreading lies for Western media and politicians to lap up and keep supporting their genocide under the biggest whopper of them all, that Israel to this day are still acting in self-defence. Well, it seems they are unhappy. Big rifts have broken out, and a number of their top spokespeople, people we've become accustomed to seeing on our screens, have stepped down. Now, some reports have been saying that this includes the man who became a meme, Mr. Pointy himself, Daniel Hagari, the head of the IDF spokesperson's unit, and somebody who was actually parachuted into that unit from outside and hadn't come up through the ranks of the unit as they typically do. This was seen at the time as interference from on high, caused a little bit of disgruntlement, shall we say. But there are conflicting reports. Many are saying that it's his number 2 who has gone. But how it's written might imply it was him. But this doesn't seem to be the case, and it would beg the question of what exactly has gone down that this is so bad, given the chuff this guy has tried selling to the world in the most incompetent ways possible, that he would have had enough. Doesn't appear to be the case. It is unconfirmed. I dare say clarification will come, but come on, he sold some of the worst, most piss-poor attempts at framing Hamas for doing this, that or the other over the last several months. This is the guy who went into a hospital and pointed at a wall and a sign on it claiming these are a list of Hamas operatives with their nefarious schemes all laid out across it, when in actual fact it was just a calendar. He most recently took to the airwaves to announce that the Flour Massacre in northern Gaza last week didn't happen at all, which the UN Security Council would have blamed Israel for in a unanimous vote, with every nation on it voting to condemn Israel for those killings, now looking more and more like an IDF setup, since no aid agency is claiming to have supplied any aid to Israel for that trip. But the US vetoed it, of course, the only ones who backed Israel over that. So could unhappiness with this imposed boss of theirs have been part of the problem? I'd have thought we'd have seen issues before now if that were the case. And if it does come out he has also resigned, and that is firmed up on, I will say Al Jazeera pulled a post saying he'd gone, so it's very much uncertain. but him aside, others definitely have. One chap we can say has definitely gone is that unusually Scottish-sounding IDF Spox by the name of Richard Hecht, originally from Glasgow, hence his accent. Can I assume in the same vein that London-born Shamima Begum has been rendered stateless, he can expect to get the same treatment, though? Oh, what am I saying? For one, of course he wouldn't. He's white, for one, and we don't recognise Israel as a terrorist state for another, and frankly, in my opinion, we should be. But for another, he's Jewish and therefore invited to settle in Israel anyway. Can't be stateless. Here's what he said anyway 2 days ago on Sky about the Flour Massacre himself, though.
What is the IDF's understanding of what happened around that aid convoy in northern Gaza?
I'll start with what you actually said at the beginning, where the IDF killed 104 people. This is incorrect. We've been trying to facilitate the entrance of humanitarian aid to the north part. We're aware of the dire situation in the north. A very tragic event where there was a convoy moving north on the coastline, and it was mobbed by a stampede of people. Very, very hard, very tragic. The law and order and the looting has been an issue, and we did everything we could. We were trying to accompany, and the only place where the IDF opened fire was on people that endangered our forces. There was no such a case, and I see you're now showing the movie, where we intentionally fired on people trying to get the aid.
Dishonest as sin, but even he has now gone, apparently quite acrimoniously too. According to Israel's Channel 14, allegedly Hecht had someone from the outside placed on him. So was he being spied on then? Was he compromised in some way? What? It's an odd, cagey choice of words, that. Just say what you mean. Either way, he's gone in a bit of a huff. Others that have apparently gone include Hagari's number 2, who apparently was just retiring. There's another one called Moran Katz, who has claimed things were just not working out for her there, professionally or personally. And others have gone citing a lack of promotion. Well, when you do get your bosses parachuted in from the outside, I guess that can happen. These are the reasons Channel 14 gives anyway, and it has to be borne in mind that they are ferociously loyal to the Netanyahu regime. They're that sort of an outlet. So if you only read their piece, or watch their piece, then you could be forgiven for thinking this is a bit of a non-story. Hard luck to Netanyahu and all that his spokespeople are going in droves. But hang on a minute. They are going in droves. They're going in droves all at once. So these reasons, well, a heck of a lot of coincidence they've all chosen to go at the same time, isn't it? If you look at other foreign media covering this, because none of our media here are mainstream media, for example, Lebanese Al Mayadeen or Iranian Shafaq News or Press TV, the departures are to do with protests within the unit on both personal and operational matters. So the truth is likely somewhere in between. All of these outlets have very distinct biases here which people should be mindful of. This side of the argument implies there's been significant outcry over Netanyahu's direction of travel as regards Rafah. Netanyahu, as we know, is a madman, and he wants the Israeli army to go into Rafah, finish the job, total victory as he calls it, and all that. He wants every single Hamas operative taken out, no matter the cost, in Palestinian lives, as we know, as we've seen. He apparently does not have the backing of the Chief of Staff of the IDF, though, a guy called Houthi Halevi, and that perhaps comes as a surprise to all of us, as there appears to be no depths the IDF won't stoop to. 30,000 dead Gazans, mostly women and children, attest to that. But the out-and-out potential extermination of Gazans who cannot go anywhere else, trapped as they are in Rafah, does seem to be a sticking point for some, according to these media outlets, including Halevi, as according to Al Mayadeen, he favours evacuation of the area and coordinating with Egypt to achieve that. Now, Israel reached Rafah a fortnight ago, and although they attack nightly, they've not flattened the place. They have seemed to be holding back in a way that they haven't previously, for example, when they went into Gaza City or into Khan Yunis. Perhaps there is a reluctance to finish the job, as we observers from points of safety have feared they might. If the propagandists are quitting because they refuse to be apologists for what Netanyahu intends to do next, wants to do next, if indeed he can convince the Chief of Staff of the IDF to do that, well, fewer people now appear to be prepared to spin it and say why that had to be done in that way. Though, of course, replacements will almost certainly be found. Could we be seeing the IDF actually saying to Bibi enough is enough in the near future? Well, I wouldn't put money on it myself. Those who have gone have already done enough damage. Perhaps they just don't have the stomach for more. Perhaps that is part of the story, and there will be others, more like Netanyahu, who have far fewer qualms about it, coming up through the ranks now, or coming in from somewhere else. Propaganda plays a huge part in Israel being able to get away with what it is getting away with. So aside from having these IDF spokespeople spinning like a top for them, attempts at infiltrating Western media have suddenly become a story as well, as this video recommendation here will tell you all about. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the Houthis of Yemen. This channel does keep coming back to them because, well, why not? They are not easing up on their attacks on pro-Israel shipping for as long as Israel's genocide in Gaza continues. Many of us respect them for their temerity here. But with the British-registered cargo vessel Rubymar now having officially sunk, it took its time, and not before the Houthis preserved the lives of all those concerned by rescuing the crew, as they did. They've officially now sunk a ship for the first time. It may not be the last, they have said. They're going to carry on despite what the West might say and how aggravated that might make us, or our government anyway. What Israel's supporters might say as well. But you might be interested to know that our diminutive Defence Secretary, with no discernible defence background, but with as many identities as he has, who knows if one of them does, although currently passing himself off as under the name of Grant Shapps, it would seem he's blown the defence budget and is going cap in hand for emergency funding to carry on his futile fight in the Red Sea. He's wasted our money on a fight we can't win because he can't handle it, because the government won't do the right thing and condemn Israel and demand they get out of Gaza. He wants to waste even more. Right, so the Rubymar has finally sunk, having been hit by Houthi rockets, which crippled it, triggering the Houthis to hurriedly rescue the crew, which they did. Preservation of life at the core of everything they've been doing. No fatalities have been recorded committed by them still, as a result of their actions in blockading the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Gulf of Aden, as they are able to do, despite having no navy at all of their own, just by virtue of their geography, rubber speedboats, drone strikes and a few missiles. The losses on the other side, though, have been catastrophic financially, with multi-million-dollar Reaper drones lost, very expensive missiles being used to take out very cheap drones, and of course all the economic fallout of shipping having to take the long way around Africa to avoid the Red Sea and the now inaccessible Suez Canal, at least as far as Israel, the US and the UK are concerned. I'm sure you've noticed your petrol prices rising. Is that a consequence of the UK attacking Yemen and getting ourselves added to the Houthis' Red Sea block list? Well, an awful lot of oil comes out of that region, doesn't it? Let's come back to the Houthis first, though, because they aren't easing up one iota in their agenda, still swearing never to let up on their blockade for as long as Israel keep pounding Gaza. They are making good on that threat, especially in light of the Rubymar finally sinking. In typical Houthis fashion, they have ridiculed the West over this to boot, putting out a video of the ship, mocking the likes of Genocide Joe and Rishi Sunak in it, all to the theme tune of Titanic, being played on what sounds like a kid's recorder, actually, and well, that is precisely why I've opted not to include it in this video, because recorders are frankly nails down the blackboard to me. Go search Houthis Titanic, I'm sure you'll find it. That said, though, here is a video clip I would like you to have a quick watch of.
Breaking news for you now, and Houthis in Yemen have said they will continue targeting British ships in the Gulf of Aden. You'll know that's following the sinking of the UK-owned vessel Rubymar. That was sunk after being struck by anti-ship ballistic missile fired a couple of weeks ago now. Hussein al-Ezi, who's the Deputy Foreign Minister in the Houthi-led government in Yemen, said in a post on X that Yemen will continue to sink more British ships and any repercussions or other damages will be added to Britain's bill, saying that following the sinking a couple of weeks ago of the UK-owned vessel, the Rubymar. More on that as we get it.
Now, they cut off that response by Yemen's Deputy Foreign Minister Hussein al-Ezi on Twitter, rather conveniently, because he said a great deal more than just the Houthis sinking more British ships and adding the cost to Britain's bill, because the full tweet reads, Yemen will continue to sink more British ships and any other repercussions or damage will be added to the bill of Britain as a rogue state that attacks Yemen and partners with America in sponsoring the ongoing crime against civilians in Gaza. You can't mess around in my country and then go spend your evening in Fabric. Whoever hurts Yemen, we will hurt. Fabric is apparently a reference to a London nightclub. You don't think of Houthis as being part of the club scene, do you? You learn something new every day. Anyway, we stuck our noses in militarily, where we had no business to whatsoever. It had nothing to do with us, because this ridiculous government of ours, like so many others, jumps the moment America tells us to, and now already in recession, we've increased our economic difficulties even more. But despite all of that, Grant Shapps, at least that is the name he goes by in government, the most inexperienced, ridiculous defence secretary we've ever had, is determined to carry on, getting fight in the Red Sea that we can't win. The Houthis repeatedly demonstrate that. They beating up Israeli forces, and they're doing it on the cheap, and no amount of aggression, which has led to the only fatalities out there, will work, because they just don't respond that way. You hit them, they just come back, saying, I can do this all day, and more cheaply than you can. Despite being in recession, Shapps wants the Treasury to cough up another £3.2 billion in emergency funding to his department. Not just to take on the Houthis, it should be noted. He wants to throw more money at Ukraine too. Priorities, you see. All that is more important than us, or public infrastructure, all that sort of stuff. These puffed up, full of their own importance, willy-waving politicians really care about. Ego-stroking, self-aggrandising and self-importance. Let's not forget we've got the budget coming up this week too, with some Tory tub-thumping going on to raise defence spending up to 3% of GDP, so we can make even more of a global nuisance of ourselves. It's not our job to keep shoring up Ukraine, not when that is requiring more money than budgeted for, and besides, you would have more money for that if you didn't insist on pissing off the Houthis and wasting money there shilling for Israel. So many people in this country are in poverty, and the fight with the Houthis is unwinnable and completely unnecessary, and we don't belong there, and is in no small part adding to those economic difficulties we're experiencing here. So if Parliament signs off on Shapps' emergency funding request, they are even more ridiculous and more wasteful than ever. The economy is supposed to be everything. That's what Boris Johnson made it out to be during the COVID crisis, isn't he? How many people died so that the economy could keep going? So in which case, why is Israel being put first all the time now? Tell them to stop. Get on the right side of history here, and once ended, the Houthis will leave our shipping alone. Container ship traffic through the Red Sea is apparently down by a third on the first part of 2024 compared to last year, and it's only Israeli, British and US shipping that is affected. We can't win this, and for as long as our stupid leaders think otherwise, it seems they'll waste even more money and resources trying. The Houthis raised their game. We can't raise ours. And they'll keep doing so if we continue to bring more arms to bear on them. Because Iran, those Iran-backed Houthis, Iranian-backed Houthis, I'm not sure the mainstream media tell us that enough. Don't forget, we might forget, but Iran will keep arming them. And they've given them a number of new toys to play with to do so. So this video recommendation here will tell you all about those. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall, a woman that was such a turn-off to Labour members in the Labour leadership race of 2015, let alone the rest of the country, that she only got 4% of the vote, losing heavily to a certain Jeremy Corbyn. But she's reminded everyone what a rancid creature she is by resurrecting the tougher than the Tories on benefits mantra of her predecessor in the role, Rachel Reeves, now of course the Shadow Chancellor and toilet block photo opportunist. Kendall has clearly decided the sort of people she wants to appeal to are the people who, after 14 years of Tory misrule and the rise on absolute poverty in the UK, still think people sit on their backsides as scroungers, but having deliberately targeted the long-term sick in a speech, actually it isn't even just so-called scroungers she's chasing, but everyone reliant on state aid just to get by. Right, so get on your bike and get a job, says Liz Kendall, invoking the ghost of Norman Tebbit, a man that would make Ebenezer Scrooge blush. But here we go again, with targeting the poorest, the sickest and the disabled in this country as a political football to kick around. Little more gets me angry at politicians than this, and the one-person tire fire of bigoted idiocy this time around, spinning this line once more in an appeal to equally bigoted and ignorant people, is Liz Kendall, the Labour MP for Leicester West, and looking to be the next in a long line of doctored deaths, set on continuing to inflict more agony on those least able to fight back should Labour win the general election. She gave a speech to the Demos think tank the other day on this. Here's a short excerpt.
for all the Tory claims about being tough on benefits, over the next 5 years, there will be 600,000 more people on sickness and disability benefits, and these benefits will cost an extra £33 billion. That is more than our current day-to-day expenditure on defence. The Office for Budget Responsibility says the sustained rise in health-related worklessness is holding back growth and living standards while putting ever greater pressure on the public finances. Yet all we get from the Tories is more of the same. More of the same half-baked programmes.
We know what we get from the Tories, Liz. Some of us have lived through it. Unpaid carers who cannot work, like myself, because they care for disabled people who cannot work. The long-term sick, many of whom have been made that way due to the mishandling of the pandemic, left with long COVID or other associated complications. People who have managed to get through and survive, frankly, the Tory assault on them and repetitious, never-ending cycles of assessment, the hoops they are made to jump through, no security in their lives whatsoever, nothing but depression and anxiety, the safety net they are supposed to support all of us, should we ever need it, God forbid we do, being chopped to bits and denied to far too many people, with the lethal consequences we've seen for too many years, far too many stories about it for far too long. How dare you sit there, stand there, and imply the Tories have been too soft? All she's worried about is the cost to the public purse of the long-term sick and the disabled, as if it's their fault that they'll get sick or disabled. It can happen to any of us, after all. She's literally blaming these people for it. How dare you cost this country so much money? You're costing us more than our defence budget. Well, I'm so sorry, disabled and sick people being disabled and sick means you can't buy more guns. She then decides to quote the Office for Budget Responsibility, who never get anything right and were set up by George Osborne, Mr. Austerity, so who should be surprised they attack the sick and disabled too by providing Kendall with figures that give her an excuse to bleat about pressure on the public finances and excuses for saying in no uncertain terms, we can't afford you, you're holding the country back, go back to work. And if they can't, just curl up and die and hurry up about it? I keep saying Labour will be no different to the Tories. They could actually be even worse. And here's yet more evidence of that. You know, I don't like to use myself as an example too often. There are many people in a worse situation than my family are. But my family are the sort of people Kendall is talking about here. And I do take that personally. I have quite a thick skin. You kind of have to deal with some of the comments you get on videos like mine. But this is ignorance that hits me straight in the gut. As regular viewers know, as will anybody who's literally read all the blurb to literally every video I put out, the descriptions in them all have a About Me section, otherwise I'm just some bold bloke you've never seen or heard of otherwise. It seems sensible to introduce oneself. But as many will know, I am a carer to 2 disabled people. The support is not there, has not been there for a long time, and despite having that job to do, that responsibility, a responsibility that if every unpaid carer in the country like me went back to work and left their loved ones in the care of the NHS, well, the health service would collapse overnight. A report from Sky News last year showed that as a collective, unpaid carers save the NHS the equivalent now of a second NHS budget, some £162 billion. Kendall can whisper about benefits costing more than the defence budget, but her stupid, reprehensible argument falls apart when compared to the size of the NHS budget and the savings made by the permanently forgotten thousands of carers in this country, people who have given up work to care for their loved ones, saves them in the billions. Now, I invest a significant amount of time in doing this, making content. It's a job I can do from home. I didn't have to earn a lot doing it to lose carers allowance entirely. There's no taper to that, incidentally, in case you weren't aware. 1 penny over, snap, it's gone. But that's just one more example of support being taken away before people are able to get back on their feet. I am eternally grateful that I've had some success at doing this, because it is the difference between making ends meet or not for my family. And queues at food banks show clearly how many people in this country are not able to make ends meet. For as much as people are permitted to work if they can on benefits as well, there are still restrictions placed on that. People are intentionally being kept in poverty. There is a poverty trap. to all of this as well. I cannot go out to work with my caring responsibilities, so what should other people in the same boat as me do then? Because what I do certainly doesn't suit anyone. It's taken years to build up as well. Years of time which people don't have. What jobs are there for them that they can then do from home then? What time would they have to make? Have they even got it? Is there enough hours in the day for them to be able to do this? Where are these jobs coming from as well? And when there is such an impetus right now from the Tories, certainly, to get people back working in the office and not from home, this is a picture that becomes ever more bleak, isn't it? No solutions are ever forthcoming, just accusations of people being a problem. Kendall offered no solutions, just condemnation. Under a Labour government with this rancid woman overseeing social security, people with all manner of illnesses and disabilities will continue to suffer, and there will be deaths associated with that. The system is inhumane. Labour could address that. Instead, they talk of making it worse. It's not tough enough. Kendall also chose to attack young people, saying, don't you dare think a lifetime on benefits is a future you can have. Well, who dreams of leaving school and going on the dole? Who plans to become sick and disabled? The knockoff Norman Tebbit Rachel Reeves Tribute Act is pathetic. I've already spoken of making video content to make ends meet. You cannot make ends meet on benefits. It's a lie. It's literally planning to live in poverty, if that really is how some people think of it. It's supposed to be the basics. Cover the basics. Cover that at least. But it doesn't even do that anymore, and hasn't for a long time. Take universal credit as a classic example. 40% of people on that are already working. What are you going to say to them? Work harder? Get another job? Again, how many hours in the day? Many of these people will be young people as well, because despite all the costs being the same, if you're under 25, then you apparently aren't worth paying even the pittance others older than you might get. Wages aren't enough to live on. The social contract is broken right then and there. Successive governments of both main parties allowing businesses to flourish as long as they are unable to pay peanuts to their employees, the shortfall being paid for out of the public purse. Even that now no longer being enough. Hence the food bank usage. Those queues at food banks prove it all. This is a problem that has been allowed to persist. They could fix it, but they won't. They're going to choose to just impoverish us wherever they can instead, because it's what successive governments have done for years, and there is no change on the horizon by swapping Tories for Labour. Both cheeks the same arse. Kendall talked of training for young people too, but again, like work, where is it going to come from? It'll take time for such things to implement, places to appear. It'll take investment to do, and right now, Rachel Reeves doesn't seem interested in doing any of that, preferring to pose in public toilets. Even if it appeared in the Labour manifesto with Starmer's relationship with the truth, even then, I wouldn't believe it. This was an exhibition in trying to out-nasty the Tories, and Kendall probably succeeded. There's a lot of talk about independent challenges to establishment MPs, and after George Galloway and a Rochdale independent candidate, a local mechanic, managed to beat all the mainstream establishment parties there, it'd be quite lovely to see somebody stand against Liz Kendall and take her down too in Leicester West. Her majority, just for reference, in case you're interested, is just 4,212. She is very beatable for the right candidate. Just putting that out there. She had plenty to say about George Galloway too, incidentally. She'll hate it now he's in Parliament, having just been sworn in. He does have a way of tearing through dishonesty and exposing MPs for not being on top of their briefs, and indeed does it to the media too, as Sam Coates found to his cost the other day, which you can watch again in all its glory in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Jeremy Hunt has just given his budget, and quite honestly, if you missed it, you really didn't miss much. Over an hour he spoke for, and for the most part, it was microeconomic tinkering and nothing that overtly affected ordinary working class people wanting to see if there were some pre-election sweeteners coming. Well, what he did put forward in the way of sweeteners was a bit of a damp squib, amounting to some £6 billion all told a year in benefits and bonuses to us, but other things he's tried to sell us, like non-dom status abolition, well, that was a bit of a con. Right, so a quick budget rundown reaction video, if you like, to what I've just witnessed and managed to stay awake through. There will be a lot of these videos around today, I'm sure, but of what was actually relevant to us in our ordinary everyday lives, there was little to cheer and a lot of putting the con into Conservatives. For an hour, Hunt spoke, and actually it amounted to very little. In fact, it probably took as long as it did, because Hunt filled his speech out with a swipe at Labour seemingly every 2 minutes, to the point I was shouting at the telly to just bloody get on with it, man. Opposition benches got away with a lot of heckling too. It was one of the more disruptive budgets I can remember watching. I think they were smelling blood on the opposition benches and they were really putting the boot in, and frankly with Eleanor Lang in the Speaker's chair, they got away with it by and large. But it really was all really thin gruel. The big policy, if you can call it that, was the cut to national insurance that we already knew was coming. In fact, the Tories first posited this in January, and it elicited not so much as a ripple in their polling at the time, yet this still remained the big one in this budget, the saving the best for last moment, and we already knew about it. With so much talk of tax cuts from the Tories, this was basically it. 2% off employees' national insurance dropping from 10% to 8%, and for the self-employed it is dropping from 8% to 6% on earnings, obviously over that tax threshold of £12,570. Obviously it depends on how much you earn, because this is a percentage as to how much you save with this, and as always, it is a giveaway most of all to the biggest earners. An MP, for example, gains £750 a year thanks to this. A newly qualified nurse, however, far more useful, just £250. And if you're on such low wages that you don't pay tax or national insurance at all because you're below that threshold, this does absolutely nothing for you. The Tories deservedly got nowhere politically with this announcement before, and they won't now. Right, so now I'm left with what else to talk about, frankly. The inequality of high earners and child benefit. We'll come to this one. It wasn't really much of anything to talk about in and of itself. But Hunt has decided to deal with this issue, and if you're not aware of what it is, anyone earning over £50,000 isn't eligible for child benefit. But if a couple earning just under £50,000 each, and both work, so earning nigh on £100,000 between them, they still qualified for it. Oh, the poor dears, however will they get by on such money? Well, Hunt is going to make tax changes to address this situation, but that apparently is going to take until 2026 to do. So meanwhile, he raised the threshold of earning up to £60,000 to qualify for it. Big bloody deal to all of us. So what else? What else indeed? £5 million to do up our village halls, no less. Well, I'm sure that'll help us keep the lights on and food in our bellies, won't it? £1 million on a memorial to Muslims who died in World War II in a, well, frankly, blatant show of trying to offset accusations of Islamophobia. That ought to be seen in the cynical manner it deserves. I am a cynic. That's exactly how I saw it. I doubt I'm going to be the only one. Though clearly such a memorial, was certainly way overdue, will be welcome. People on universal credit, so poor they have to take out loans to help with additional unexpected expenses. Oh dear, the fridge is gone. Will now have a whole 2 years instead of 1 to pay said loans back. Well, yay. The debt relief order charge of £90 is being abolished. Yay! And the household support fund will continue for another 6 months. Bribes, certainly, but really, really cheap, really small ones. And really not anything that's going to make life meaningfully better for people. He also froze alcohol and fuel duty. Hunt bleated on a lot about lower taxes equaling higher growth. They don't. It cannot. It is ridiculous to even try and justify that, but that is Thatcherism 101. Tax take is the offset to public spending. If you cut taxes, you have to cut public spending as well, or inflation goes up. Cutting taxes for those with the least is great. I'm all for it, but you need to levy more on the wealthy to make up for that. Yet if you listen to Hunt, they are apparently investing whilst making a very small tax cut to national insurance. Actually, he was cutting more, but calling it investment instead. He increased the VAT tax registration threshold a little bit. The Freeport's con of favourable rates in certain areas of the country was another investment. The oil and gas industry in the North Sea will continue to get stupidly favourable tax rates as well, but that's investment. He bragged of giving manufacturers of cars and computer equipment a nice going rate so they invested more here, but that's them investing, not the government, and they're only doing so because the government has incentivised them to do that with tax cuts. So what's the gain to the public purse here? Where's the growth come from that? taxes in some cases have actually gone up so that Hunt can make his alleged cuts elsewhere, showing more of the con he was pulling. There's going to be a duty coming in on vaping. I don't argue against that particularly. Duty on tobacco is going up as well by 1%. Fair enough. I don't smoke. If you do, tough. The loopholes being exploited by the furnished holiday lettings industry, though, this was a more interesting one. Over holiday lettings tax are being closed. Multiple dwellings relief is being abolished. The energy profits levy is being extended for a bit longer when the industry just needs renationalising and taking back under our control. But the biggest con of all, the one he really tried it on with, and frankly I don't see how anybody hasn't seen through this, but the media are spinning like mad over it, as you can expect them to do. The biggest con was the expected abolition of the non-dom status, because no matter how many times you will hear that it is being abolished, it is not. It's just being replaced with another system. What Hunt wants to do is not just ditch it and leave it at that, leave people who exploit such a favourable tax regime because they can afford to use it. Instead, a 4-year limit will now be placed on basically non-dom status when people first come to this country, after which they must pay tax like everybody else is supposed to do. As for those already enjoying non-dom status, Hunt was a little bit more opaque, saying there would be a transitional period lasting 2 years, but what that transitional period would look like, we don't know. That's 2 years for them basically to find another way to avoid tax then. It's what they do. Non-dom status is just one way the rich have exploited our stupidly overcomplicated taxation system, and they will just find another. Apart from that, though, there were some promises on public services, a digital rollout in the NHS, for example, but it was shoulder-shrugging stuff. We need doctors and nurses, proper ones, real ones, not these fake doctor, physicians, associates people. Talking about tech in the health service isn't getting us seen, isn't getting us operated on, isn't getting us well and back to becoming productive members of society, if due to our health at this moment in time, we are not. There was also the predictable OBR contributions, which Hunt gurned through. Oh, look at this lovely tax cut-induced growth he smarmed. The fact we're currently in a recession seems to have gone clean over his head. What also went over his head is that the OBR predictions have been downgraded. They've downgraded growth since last time. There really isn't anything else to add. This is all there was. I heard on Sky, overheard, whilst writing this, I had the telly on next to me, that someone has said, I assume someone from the Tory party, said something along the lines of Hunt needed to use a defibrillator to get their electoral chances alive again, and instead he threw an aspirin at it. That pretty much sums it up very nicely, I thought. The Tories are doomed at the next election. They are frankly just delaying the inevitable now. They'd be better off getting on and calling the bloody thing, because politics right now feels like a plaster slapped on a particularly hairy arm being pulled off very slowly. It's just a case of, with Starmer waiting in the wings, he's stood there with a bigger plaster waiting to stick it on an even hairier part of your anatomy. What we haven't heard more of this time is the more lethal cuts to disability benefits that Hunt was talking about just a few months ago. Has he hidden them somewhere, or are they still to come if the Tories insist on squatting in power for as long as possible? Find out all about that particular story here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel, now a life peer, has recently completed a report for the Tory government urging a zero-tolerance approach to pro-Palestine and climate protesters. I can't imagine why such a person could have come to such a conclusion, can you? He has accused the likes of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign of having hate within their ranks, and they should not be engaged with by politicians until they get their house in order. Does all this sound very vaguely familiar? Well, given this awful individual was also one of the most vocal critics of Jeremy Corbyn, that perhaps is no surprise. He was an absolute balloon then and remains so now, as yet another excuser of Israeli genocide tries to point the finger at Palestine Solidarity and say, look at them, not at Israel. That's where the hate is. Well, I'm not buying what you're selling here, sunshine. Right, so for those unfamiliar with this story, the individual we're talking about here is a certain John Woodcock, who now prefers to style himself as Baron Wolney. And for those of us with a passing familiarity with this chap, there might be a very good reason for why he chooses to detach himself, publicly at least, from his own. Because one of the first things you're likely to find upon searching his name is why he quit the Labour Party. having been suspended and under investigation under allegations of sexual harassment against a staff member. He's always refuted this, it should be noted, but when he was suspended in May of 2018, he said a thorough and meaningful investigation must take place, but for some reason, perhaps it was too thorough or too fast, he quit the party the following month. It was only ever an internal party investigation. The alleged victim never wanted it investigated, never came forward about it. It all came out as part of a newspaper leak, which Labour then acted upon. But because Woodcock appeared to have run away from that investigation, it's continued to follow him around. At any rate, this video has nothing to do with that, because Woodcock, or Walney, whatever you want to call him, is also a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel, and his actions right now concerning his report conducted for the Tory party, so you can see what sort of a Labour politician he very much was, on the right, red Tory, pro-Israel, very much plays into the Labour Friends of Genocide terminology being far more frequently used regarding that group on social media these days. Woodcock is a life peer these days. He got given a peerage in the 2019 dissolution honours list of Boris Johnson, then the PM, or he was by the time this list came out, as it was mid-2020 by then. And it was a reward for a number of horrible Brexiteer-type former Labour figures. Labour members taking a peerage from a Tory, although all by this point were independents and sit in the Lords as such. They're all crossbenchers. Others on that notorious awards list of that year include Ian Austin, Kate Hoy, Frank Field and Gisela Stewart. Woodcock very much fitting in very comfortably with all of them and had no qualms taking a peerage from a Tory. Woodcock was quite content to take a brief from the Tories too, as in 2021 Johnson appointed him as the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption, and he was tasked to produce a report into the extreme fringes of both ends of the political spectrum in Britain and make recommendations to the Prime Minister thereon. It has not been made public yet, though we do know it has been completed. Sunak and James stupidly will go over it first, but that didn't stop Woodcock running to the Murdoch paper, known in polite circles as the Scum, to whisper about what his review says, which other papers, because I will not look for all the tea in China at that one, say includes a ban on MPs and councillors from engaging with the likes of Extinction Rebellion, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Just Stop Oil. His report alleges that they should get their houses in order and flush out all of their hate, playing into Tory narratives of hate marches and mob rule, and thinks they should be forced to pay towards policing costs like sectarian parades in Northern Ireland do. Comparing standing up for Palestine to Orange Order marches, that's a fair old stretch now, isn't it? His report is yet to come out, as I've said, but he's hardly pointed out publicly, for example, Tommy Robinson-type mobs, as we saw at the Cenotaph last November that I have noticed, or mentioned any of the far smaller, not that the organisers ever admit it, Israel solidarity demos. And this is getting to the crux of the problem with appointing so-called independent crossbencher Woodcock to do this review, because he is as biased as sin, being a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel, and enjoying much hospitality from them ever since, even as recently as January just gone. He is anything but independent, or can be seen as independent and impartial on anything that involves Israel. The brilliant Foreign Affairs journalist John McAvoy has written a rundown of Woodcock's Israeli links in Declassified UK, which reads, in 2011, 1 year after being elected as a Labour MP, Woodcock was appointed chair of the pro-Israel lobby group Labour Friends of Israel, LFI. That year he travelled to Israel on a trip funded by LFI, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Portland Trust. During the visit, Woodcock and 7 other MPs planted trees in Israel's Aminadav forest, around 7 miles west of Jerusalem, which was established by the Jewish National Fund, JNF. The JNF is a quasi-governmental organisation which has supported illegal Israeli settlements in Palestine and was described by historian Ilan Pape as a colonialist agency of ethnic cleansing. During his time as an MP, Woodcock also accepted funding from the Australia-Israel Cultural Exchange, a group established in 2003 by the then Israeli Foreign Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Australian counterpart. I was one of the people who had a lazy, ill-informed and I guess small-level prejudice against the nation of Israel, Woodcock has said. I had this ill-thought-out sense of Israel as being the powerful, unfair aggressors to their neighbours. This all changed, he noted, following a visit to Israel while working with a student organisation. No longer an MP, Woodcock was ennobled to the House of Lords in 2020 and appointed as the government's advisor on political violence and disruption. Woodcock has continued to accept funds from Britain's Israel lobby amid the genocide in Gaza. In January this year, Woodcock visited Israel as part of a parliamentary delegation organised by the European Leadership Network, ELNet UK, with flights and accommodation paid for by the organisation. Woodcock apparently did not publicise his trip to Israel. It does not feature on his formerly Twitter page, and it gained no media attention. He was joined by Conservative MP Tom Hunt and Conservative Friends of Israel's honorary president, Lord Pollack. Hunt described the delegation as a solidarity mission. ELNet was created in 2007 to counter the widespread criticism of Israel in Europe, and has since described South Africa's genocide case as the ICJ as politically motivated and legally tenuous. The organisation's British wing is directed by former Labour MP and LFI chair Joan Ryan, while much of its operations are run from its office in Tel Aviv, headed by Emmanuel Navon. Navon has described Israel's possible offensive into Rafah, the Rafah area of Gaza, as necessary, and suggested that EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell need not worry about Gaza civilians should it happen. Woodcock was funded by ELNet while preparing to deliver his report concerning Palestine protests in Britain. Is this the sort of person who can produce a credible report talking about hate marches taking place that oppose Israel, in which case? A guy that went on a solidarity mission to Israel just 2 months ago, halfway through the middle of a 5-month-long genocide? Not to my mind it doesn't. His report makes recommendations. That's all the report will actually do. They aren't laws. He hasn't got the power to do that. But the Tories and Labour, both, are being encouraged by this report to act on his recommendations. Labour, arguably under Starmer, would do so more readily than anyone else, bringing in laws along these lines, an authoritarian clampdown on free speech in the name of protecting us, when it is complete and utter bullshit. Just yet more of a clampdown on speaking out against the genocidal apartheid state of Israel. It is enabling genocide, supporting genocide, whilst banning objection to it. The hypocrisy in addressing extremism in this country when we're governed by the mob, looking at a review they commissioned, by a guy totally compromised with his pro-Israel leanings. This should be an out-and-out scandal. Should be being shouted from the rooftops, and the protests, well, they will carry on. People will not follow a stupid, pointless, evil law based on any of this, that should it come to pass, that would be designed to do nothing but gag us as we continue to watch Israeli atrocity. My fear is we will see more weaponisation of Islamophobia to help justify that. The language of hate, the actions of hate, are coming from mainstream politicians like Starmer, like Sunak, like Lee Anderson or Robert Jenrick or Suella Braverman, like Lindsay Hoyle, who got himself off the hook for wrecking the SNP ceasefire motion by blaming terrorist threats he hadn't previously brought up. And now Lord Wolney can add himself to this list, or in all likelihood will be once we get eyes on his review ourselves. These are the same people who will absolutely pass a law like this. Well, I won't be staying quiet about it either as a councillor myself or indeed on this channel. And as much as our leaders in this country seem set on carrying on supporting Israel and going along with whatever genocidal lies they're coming out with now, weaponising racism even to do so, many of Israel's own spokespeople in the IDF, no less, can't bring themselves to carry on doing that and have resigned en masse over it. As you can see on this video recommendation here, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so while the media and politicians across the world pore over the events of the so-called Flour Massacre in northern Gaza, the legitimacy of the aid they were carrying coming into question, the lives lost there at the hands of the IDF. If aid can't get in there, the one thing that has succeeded in entering the strip, weirdly enough, are illegal settlers. For so long, Israeli excuses of self-defence whilst flattening the Gaza Strip from north to south has had many commentators, myself included, suspecting Israel intended to take Gaza for itself. And certainly some of the more loudmouth elements of Netanyahu's government have voiced their loud support for the seizure of the Palestinian territory. Heck, there's even been a conference by the settler movement Nahala, with government figures as guests, where all the settlements to go in Gaza have been drawn up already, all of which I've covered in other content. But with settlers having been allowed into northern Gaza, or at least got away with getting into northern Gaza, where Palestinians have recently been killed, and indeed the IDF have shot any Gazans attempting to return north during last November's ceasefire, it looks more and more like this is very much the plan now.
חבר'ה מטורף, אנחנו בעזה, איזה כיף לנו, כולם הולכים לחזור לפה בקרוב, הולכים לחזור לגוש קטיף, הולכים לבנות כאן פי 4 ממה שיישובים שהיה כאן, פי 10, הכל יהיה שלנו, זה החורבות, לא יישאר מזה כלום, אנחנו כאן, אבא תודה, אבא אנחנו כאן, אבא איזה מטורף, אנחנו בעזה, בואו כולם אלינו, זה מטורף, כולם רוצים, גם החיילים שמפנים אותנו הם באמת רוצים להיות פה, הכל בסדר, כולם איתנו, חבר'ה מטורף.
Right, so what you saw there are settlers that broke through the northern Gaza crossing at Eretz, not really being stopped in any meaningful way from having done so. You saw some Israelis chatting quite happily to the soldiers there in the first bit of video. They've been stopped from entering Gaza, those ones. But the second bit there showed other settlers who had already broken through. Apparently some 100 odd of them managed to enter, and some stopped to build what was in their words a symbolic building, but what amounts to the most significant attempt by settlers to try and enter Gaza to re-establish the settlements taken down in 2005. When Israel withdrew from its habitation of the Strip, they subsequently, of course, turned it into the world's largest concentration camp by whacking up massive walls all around it. Well, these walls didn't contain these 100 or so settlers who managed to get through, came in, and the 20 or so of them who were documented and shown there building that structure between the two walls that comprise that barrier around the Strip. It's a double wall. As the last bit of footage showed, though, not all of them chose to do that. Others sought to get much further into Gaza, cheering about re-establishing the old settlement of Gush Katif, that there will be 4 times the number of settlements, 10 times what came before, even as soldiers finally decided to lead them back out of Gaza. What a difference to the events of the Flour Massacre, laughing and joking as soldiers lead them out. Gazans, as we know, were gunned down instead. This incursion has been appallingly badly covered, but here's an excerpt from the left-wing Israeli magazine 972 Magazine, which gives a succinct summation. Over 100 Israelis stormed Eretz crossing at the northern tip of Gaza yesterday afternoon in the most significant attempt to re-establish Jewish settlements in the Strip since the war began. A small number managed to cross several hundred meters into Gaza before being intercepted by Israeli soldiers, while around 20 others entered the area between the two walls comprising the barrier that encases the Strip. There they established an outpost in the style seen commonly in the West Bank, building for several hours without the army or police interfering. From the first moments of the war, it was clear that right-wing Israeli politicians and settler leaders sensed an opportunity to radically shift the status quo in Israel-Palestine. For months, calls to resettle Gaza, often in the same breath as calling to expel the Strip's 2.3 million Palestinian residents, have been getting louder, not least at a major conference in Jerusalem in January, at which senior officials laid out their plans. In parallel, right-wing activists, mostly youth, have been coming regularly to the Gaza fence to demonstrate against the entry of humanitarian aid into the Strip. Yesterday's action, however, marked a new peak in their activities. At around 2 p.m, activists began gathering at a train station in the southern Israeli city of Sderot, close to Gaza. At that initial meeting point, for what was ostensibly a protest honouring Harel Sharavit, a settler who was killed while serving in Gaza, the mood was calm, even sleepy. A police car drove past, unmoved by the scene. From there, the activists drove in private cars toward the Eretz checkpoint, the only civilian crossing point between Israel and the Gaza Strip, which has been defined by the Israeli army as a closed military zone since it was briefly taken over by Palestinians amidst the Hamas-led October 7th attacks on southern Israel. One point of note that excerpt didn't mention, however, but which has come out subsequently, was that one of the invading Israelis there was apparently the son of Israel's Minister of Heritage. How ironic, not to mention perverse. Amihai Eliyahu, himself an extremist far-right politician, and of course a part of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government, coming from the hard-right Otzma Yehudit party, the party led by settler hero and Zionist loudmouth Itamar Ben-Gvir. Eliyahu is himself a settler. He lives in the West Bank. So presumably his son travelled specifically to Gaza to be part of this. And, well, Eliyahu is a real charmer. This is a guy who has supported the notion of nuking Gaza, whilst also being a proponent of settling it. You might find there's an issue with doing both of those things. He opposed the two-state solution. He's called for the execution of Palestinian prisoners and has attacked the IDF for being too soft on Palestinians. He also endorses the expulsion of Palestinians from their lands with no support, saying they can go to the desert or go to Ireland. He's not the first to say they can go to Ireland. Makes me wonder what Israelis actually think Ireland is actually like. And he also opposes humanitarian aid on the basis that they'd never give aid to the Nazis, so why should we give it to them? Again, we are reminded of the sort of people Netanyahu, himself already a madman, was prepared to do a deal with to get back into power. To my mind, this story casts further doubt on the matters surrounding the Flour Massacre, now Flour Massacres, since there's been a second one, near the Kuwait roundabout in Gaza City itself the day before yesterday. The last one was just to the south of Gaza City. No aid agency to date has admitted to having supplied the flour for Israel to deliver into the north of Gaza. We know there are people there still. We know they are desperate, clinging to some form of survival, been over a month since they've seen any aid. And this was the first aid delivery in all that time. But who did it come from? Because with no aid agency admitting to it, it does smack of a ruse to lure people out to be taken out, because that is certainly what ended up happening, isn't it? We've seen plenty of aid deliveries. They've never resulted in mass killing like this one did, or these ones now have done. I'm also reminded that during the ceasefire last November, people who attempted to return to their homes in the north of Gaza faced being shot, and indeed some were. I'm also minded to remember that Israeli forces have hampered aid deliveries to the north by actual legitimate agencies trying to do so, such as UNWRA, so they had ended up giving up trying to get into the north. And of course Israel have tried delegitimizing UNWRA to take them out of the equation too and render Gaza unsurvivable under Israeli occupation. Having not coughed up their so-called evidence for that, the EU have, as I spoke in a video about the other day, resumed funding to UNWRA. They've sent them 50 million euros. So it's no coincidence that Israel have now made more accusations against another 450 UNWRA workers now. And again, not producing any evidence to back it up. Clearly, they are determined and really hoping they have a chance to take that agency down. So as much as all of this, where it comes to settling Gaza, is circumstantial right now, a small incursion, 2 massacres of starving people, the lowest of the low, aid being blocked in the south by more settlers as well as to the north, more attacks on aid agencies, Israeli politicians gobbing off about settlements and attending settler conferences. Having shared my thoughts on all of this previously and here again now, thoughts that I don't think are at all conspiratorial, all things considered, I don't think it matters how many nations around the world are saying they won't tolerate Gaza being taken over by Israel, because it very much seems to me that that is exactly what is intended, and because none are still, to this day, stepping up properly and sanctioning Israel over what they've done so far, still supporting them in too many cases, why should Israel fear being stopped from seizing that land? In fact, the West are doing everything but sanction Israel. They're still protecting it. Certainly the US and the UK are. Our daft little defence secretary with a Napoleon complex wants more funding to keep on losing to the Houthis in the Red Sea, for instance. Watch this video recommendation here to find out all about British government idiocy on that score and not taking the hint they can't win there. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so when it comes to media bias, one of the first outlets that gets pointed at, and not for no reason, is the one we all pay a levy to keep going, the BBC. The licence fee, part of the reason so many of us get so angry at it, both on the left and on the right as it happens. Some might call that the very balance that the BBC is supposed to maintain, but when you're balancing opinion by everybody hating you, that can't be right, can it? But a report on Physicians Associates, fake doctors in our NHS by a BBC reporter is gaining significant notoriety, not only because of its inaccuracies, but the fact the reporter in question, Gem O'Reilly, appears to be blocking anyone pointing these shortcomings out. Why have the BBC not stepped in here? Why are they apparently happy to keep supporting a report that doctors that are reading it are actually slamming? We need more real, properly trained physicians, not fake ones doing the same job with less training and undoubtedly for less money, because this will cost lives. So what gives? Right, so physicians associates, anaesthetists associates, the terminology is getting a little bit more traction. More and more people are hearing about these things. They aren't doctors, but you'll be fooled into thinking they are if the government gets away with it, especially given that government have legislated for the General Medical Council, the GMC, to oversee these people, regulate them, when the GMC is the regulatory body for real doctors only, or at least that has been the case up until now. Let's not beat around the bush with this. Like nurses, there's been a steady decline in doctors' training places in this country, despite the clear and obvious need for them. There has also been a bottleneck created for employment of said doctors, which, given the shortages, you might think sounds a little bit crazy. But when there's a cheaper option on the horizon, perhaps makes more sense because no longer is primary care an altruistic health of the nation issue. It's all about business decisions these days. Who's making money out of it? Because this is what always happens when shit gets privatised, and it's been happening by stealth for ages in our NHS, from hospital services being outsourced to external private health companies taking over GP surgeries and chains. Now, knowing that, it might stun you to realise that of the doctors who applied for GP posts last year, 6,500 of them didn't get offered a place. It's not like the vacancies are not there. We know they are, and getting there in ever-increasing number. But general practice takes more training than any other NHS doctor post. Training posts are not there. They're not being made available because NHS England is refusing to fund them. And if you think when I refer to NHS England that I'm referring to the NHS itself, I am not, because NHS England is just the quango set up by government to oversee pretty much the privatisation of the service by stealth. Actual doctors are more expensive to train and warrant more pay than, say, a quick and easy solution, like a less well-trained, less well-paid alternative that's being passed off as a genuine article. Fake doctors. If ever there is a term that should strike fear into anyone, it's fake doctors. An inadequately trained medic being put in charge of your health. There's only one road that leads down, and that's a two-tier NHS where you can pay for a premium service where you get an actual doctor, NHS Prime perhaps they'll call it, or if you don't or can't afford it, well, you'll get whoever you get. Lottery, doctor, or not. Not that they'll tell you otherwise. This is going to be a massive scandal. And the BBC, well, it's been found wanting when it decided to cover the story because it is biased as sin. Have a look at this and see what you think.
Well, Jem joins us now from the newsroom. So describe to us exactly what a physician associate is.
Physician associates have been working in the NHS since 2003. They can examine, diagnose and develop treatment plans for patients. They cannot prescribe and they cannot request ionising radiation, which involves CT scans or X-rays. Their work must be overseen by that of a senior doctor. The difference between a physician associate and a doctor is that a physician associate goes through a 2-year master's programme in physician associate training, but a doctor will have 5 years of med school and then clinical work on top of that. Physician associates do play an important role in the NHS when their work is supervised correctly.
The government began the legal process to set these new rules back in December. What's the latest line?
So the latest line that we have found out today is that the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges has backed the government's push to increase physician associates to 10,000 by 2037. Currently in the UK there are 3,286 physician associates. However, the Academy makes it clear that the scope of practice for physician associates must be outlined and that there must be clear guidelines as to how they're deployed across different trusts in the UK.
What are there other views on this? Tell us what else people have been saying.
So the British Medical Association is concerned about the new regulation coming in, which will involve the General Medical Council overseeing physician associates. They say that because the General Medical Council already oversees doctors, they believe that that will further blur the lines between doctors and physician associates. However, the Royal College of Physicians says that regulation is key for providing an avenue for potential complaints or any concerns that people may have.
And what about the families you've spoken to?
So the families are absolutely tragic cases, that of Ben that's in the article and Emily that you just heard there. However, they are isolated incidents and they are not indicative of a wider safety issue. Physician associates have told me themselves that they would welcome a more defined scope of practice. As I say, it is still, a very much positive thing that they're in the NHS, but doctors are calling for a much clearer defined role for these individuals.
Gemma Riley, thank you very much indeed.
So, having watched that, did you feel it was impartial? Gemma O'Reilly, the reporter there, to me sounded like she was reading from a prepared script given to her by NHS England itself. It really did feel like a setup more than an interview. Questions and answers all pre-prepared, and it was definitely anything but impartial. When you got past O'Reilly's explanation of what physician associates are and the concerns people have were discussed, for as much as she did say what those concerns were, there was always a but. There was always an however. O'Reilly pushed PAs as a good thing, but that they have been around since 2003, implying this is nothing new, that a reputable body, the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, has backed increasing numbers of PAs. But then they would. They're training institutions. This will provide them with work. There are, as O'Reilly states, only a little over 3,000 of them to this day in the NHS, so that 2003 business is a bit of a deception when clearly these roles have only ever been a very minor thing in the NHS grand scheme of things, not very many of them. They've actually only been called physicians' associates since 2013, because before that they were physicians' assistants, making very clear their specific and far more minor role to that of doctors, and that the government's proposal to train treble that number of them now, well, of a sudden do we need so many more of these fake doctors when we have actual doctors unable to fill roles because training won't be provided for them? Oh, but training will be provided for these people. 2 years of training for a fake doctor versus 5 years of medical school and then clinical training for a real one. Gee, I wonder why the cheaper option appeals so much to these money grabbers and privatisers. The fake doctor course is also apparently unaccredited. Just rub it in a bit more. It's a price that should be more obvious to everyone made aware of this properly, honestly and impartially, that the price will be measured in lives, not in pounds sterling. They must be overseen by proper doctors, we're told. They aren't allowed to prescribe, we're told. Their roles must be properly defined, we keep being told. But with cases of misdiagnosis already amongst PAs, fatally so in too many cases, this has not been happening. And again, with a shortage of real doctors, there's going to be a shortage of oversight, isn't there? It was when O'Reilly was asked about other views, though, that the bias really became apparent, I thought. She spoke about the BMA's concerns, the British Medical Council, the trade union of the doctors, their concerns being the muddying of the waters by having the GMC regulate fake doctors as well as real ones. Yet she chose to bring up the Royal College of Physicians at the same time as an answer to this, who have said regulation is key. Well, of course regulation is key, but set up another body to do it for these people then. Don't lump them in with real doctors. And why are you spinning that line anyway? Your job is to report the news, not offer up solutions on behalf of the government. It's their scheme. Let them sell it. It isn't your job to do that, so why are you doing that? Got worse than that though, didn't it? The Royal College is also going to be holding an emergency general meeting next week to discuss their members' concerns about this. It should be mentioned. The families of those affected by fake doctor malpractice, mentioning, albeit very briefly, a woman called Emily. This was Emily Chesterton, a 30-year-old actress who went to the doctor with leg pain. Thought she'd seen a real GP, but instead had been seen a PA, unbeknownst to her, who diagnosed her with a sprained ankle. She had in fact got a blood clot, which, undiagnosed, sadly proved fatal for her. The pain, incidentally, was in her calf, which is where clots usually appear when you get them in the leg. So how an ankle sprain was diagnosed from that, I can't fathom. Basic anatomy not in that training manual. But this is the risk to the public the fake doctors pose. Instead, O'Reilly othered this as well. And this actually angered me more than anything else in her report. Isolated cases and not indicative of a wider problem, she said. Again, why are you making excuses for government policy when you are just supposed to report the news? Why is the BBC seemingly so hell-bent on selling this idea? Why has this report been allowed to even stand? Why has the BBC not taken it down? She even ended her spiel by saying physicians' associates are a very positive thing. That is not your place to say. What professional opinion do you have on that? None. You aren't a doctor. You're more a spokesperson for the Tory Health Department than you are any kind of journalist to boot. And it is certainly in that vein that Gemma O'Reilly has come in for a lot of criticism for her report. She's ever so proud of it, though. It's her pinned post on Twitter, don't you know, which she evidently cannot take. Dr. Matt Neal, for example, of Doctors Association UK, tweeted out to her in reply to that video clip that, Gemma, this is really disappointing. Unfortunately, Doctors Association UK didn't hear from you, but we could have shared significant evidence that these are not isolated incidents, and are in fact the tip of the iceberg. Much of this feels like you are regurgitating as fact the fiction that's been put out by PA groups. And it really did. She sounded more like a representative than a so-called impartial BBC journalist. Perhaps that makes her the PA equivalent of a journalist. At any rate, O'Reilly appears to be blocking any and all people who are calling out her PA advocacy in her reporting. GP Hannah Edwards wrote after she got blocked that seems like Gemma O'Reilly has blocked every doctor who raised any valid concerns about her reporting yesterday. I commented about valid concerns we've raised about GMC regulation. How is this balanced reporting if any polite, reasonable questions are just blocked? BBC News, do better. She's far from alone. A lot of people are reporting that they've been blocked by O'Reilly as a result of daring to pick her up on her reports. And indeed, that pinned post of hers has had the comments turned off of it now, certainly implying she's got her fingers in her ears going, la, 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 I'm not listening. Is that the level BBC News reporting is at now, is it? People have died. If more of these fill more of the roles genuine doctors should be, more of these PAs, then the BBC are going to be making excuses for that as well, as this report should be making abundantly obvious. This sort of reporting, in my view, is endangering lives because people need to know that the person they go to and think is a doctor might not be, and they aren't going to be in a hurry to tell you otherwise. This isn't just a scheme being pushed and supported by the Tories either, because, as you might have expected, when doesn't Keir Starmer agree with the Tories? Labour also support this, and therefore the guaranteed continuation of its rollout, if Labour get into power, is seemingly assured. And all the details of that can be found on this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so South Africa is taking a third turn at the International Court of Justice, having submitted an emergency request for further provisional measures and modification of the ICJ's ruling, this time in light of the starvation being inflicted on the Gazan people. Having successfully proven their case at the end of January, with the ICJ indicating a plausible case for genocide against Israel, an attempt last month for further measures failed, with the ICJ simply urging Israel to follow the letter of their January judgment. So will things be different this time, as Israel continued to blatantly disregard these rulings, having already publicly denounced them and stating they will not be following them? Right, so it was really disappointing stuff last month when the International Court of Justice, in light of the continued and relentless genocide in Gaza being committed by Israel, and in light of the provisional orders they themselves laid down against Israel, they chose not to use their additional powers within their possession to mete out further constraints on the genocidal regime. I have no doubt at all that they would ignore them in Israel, but it heaps further pressure on other countries still aiding them, or still sitting on their hands, to pull their fingers out and do something about this ongoing humanitarian disaster. So what's changed this time that South Africa think will make a difference? Well, for one, at the point of South Africa's submission, Israel was still within that 1 month period the ICJ had given them to report on the actions they had taken in order to demonstrate they were taking notice of the ICJ's rulings and provisional orders. The time is now well past, and Israel have indeed, it might surprise you to know, made a submission, but it's not been made public. This is somewhat annoying, given it is no doubt a pack of lies that deserve to be shredded by the world, not least myself. They left it until the very last day they had to submit it, which was the 26th of February, but none of its contents have been disclosed except to the ICJ themselves. Now, if they decide this is demonstrably nonsense that they've been given, as I would imagine they would, I would hope they would, I can't imagine Israel have all of a sudden found an honesty bone in their bodies, could that sway them in South Africa's direction now? Certainly, South Africa can, and have in their latest submission, pointed to their second request dated the 12th of February, which concerned Rafah, concerned a lot of indication of where Israel were not meeting the terms of the ICJ's provisional orders from the first ruling, dated the 26th of January, from South Africa's first submission. But one of the defining aspects of the genocide, certainly over the last month, has been the starvation. Images of children having starved to death are pervading social media at the moment, and this has served as the basis for South Africa's latest attempt at getting further provisional orders placed upon Israel. The latest submission is considerably shorter than we've seen previously, and it reads, "The Republic of South Africa submits an urgent request for the indication of additional provisional measures and the modification of the court's prior provisional measures, order and decision." The Hague, 6th of March 2024. South Africa today filed an urgent request with the court for the indication of additional provisional measures and the modification of the court's order of 26th of January 2024 and decision of 16th of February 2024 in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. In its new request, South Africa states that it is compelled to return to the court in light of the new facts and changes in the situation in Gaza, particularly the situation of widespread starvation, brought about by the continuing egregious breaches of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide by the State of Israel and its ongoing manifest violations of the provisional measures indicated by this court on the 26th of January 2024. It requests the court to indicate further provisional measures and or to modify the provisional measures indicated in its order of 26th of January 2024 pursuant to Article 41 of the Statute of the Court and Article 75 paragraphs 1 and 3 and Article 76 paragraph 1 of the Rules of Court, respectively, in order urgently to ensure the safety and security of 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, including over 1 million children. It urges the court to do so without holding a hearing in light of the extreme urgency of the situation. People are starving to death daily now. The urgency of the request here is fully warranted, in my opinion. I would hope on this occasion the court listens, especially now they have that submission from Israel, whatever farce of a submission that may be that has been made by Israel to them. Seemingly the only provisional order that they have, in fact, followed. They have, as you might have expected, jibbed off about South Africa doing the heavy lifting of carrying international law for the entire planet, it seems, as they still are doing. As a spokesperson for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a chap called Lior Hayat, took to Twitter to trot out the oh-so-boring and predictable. South Africa continues to act as the legal arm of Hamas in an attempt to undermine Israel's inherent right to defend itself and its citizens, and to release all of the hostages. The repeated requests for provisional measures made by South Africa in order to assist Hamas are yet another cynical exploitation of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which has already twice rejected the baseless attempts to deny Israel its right and obligation of self-defense. Israel acts and will continue to act in accordance with international law, including by facilitating humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, regardless of any legal proceedings. We call on the ICJ to reject outright the new request of the representatives of Hamas. Well, they only rejected the last attempt, sunshine, and frankly the ICJ by its own orders was still giving you the full time accorded by them. That's run out now, but dishonesty appears to be as much Israel's stock in trade as apartheid is, and now just as much as it ever was. Kids are starving to death by your nation's hands as your citizens, your settler types, your Zionist sociopaths cheer and wave and block humanitarian aid getting in by road. Jordan has been airdropping in supplies where it can, acting of its own volition. The US, perversely, has been doing likewise, whilst it still won't sanction Israel or withdraw its support. A demonstration to my mind that Genocide Joe has lost control entirely of the Israel project, and the only response from Israel itself is to fall back on the lame-ass, pathetic, well-worn-out and utterly false claims that anyone supporting Palestine, standing with the people of Gaza, over 30,000 of whom are now dead by Israeli hands, are actually supporting Hamas. South Africa have been accused of being the political mouthpieces of Hamas, their legal arm. Have you ever known such a whingy government in all your life as that of Israel? What a bunch of whiners! Why won't you stop picking on us? Why won't you just let us do our genocide in peace? Heck, the only thing that surprised me in that statement is they didn't play the anti-Semitism card as well. But as much as any of us can sit here all day and condemn Israel for what they are doing, and justifiably so, equally we should be condemning every other country for what they are not. Not withdrawing support, not condemning Israel as well, not standing up for Palestine, and that also goes for the ICJ if, at this point now, they still choose not to act additionally, as they are well within their rights to do and abilities, and more questions about the effectiveness of that branch of the UN will surely follow if they don't. I wish South Africa's lawyers, again, the very best of luck. If you want to find out more about that second submission of South Africa's, which fell in more detail because it wasn't as widely covered as the first one was, then do check out this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks. Right, so how much noise did Keir Starmer and Labour make upon losing the Rochdale by-election to George Galloway that he got an endorsement from hard-right has-been Nick Griffin, formerly of the BNP? Not that it made a difference to the end result. I dare say more people in Rochdale were offended by the ongoing atrocities in Gaza. The fact Labour have failed them for years and they wanted change was what was at the forefront of their minds. Not so much some far-right has-been saying Galloway isn't perfect, but vote for him anyway. However, a far firmer and a lot less publicised endorsement has come Keir Starmer's way, from the hard-right Trumpist Steve Bannon, no less. So what exactly attracted him to the brill-creamed one then, because it surely can't be his position on anti-Semitism? Right, so whilst George Galloway has now taken his seat in Parliament, ready to cause problems, or be one, we'll have to wait and see, for all the faults that man has, for all the criticism that can justifiably be levelled at him, all manner of things, his support for Gaza is not one of them, as I've said in previous videos before, and it is that support that saw him win in Rochdale, despite perfectly justifiable questions being made about the right-wing company he has kept in the past, and indeed that endorsement he got from Nick Griffin during the Rochdale campaign certainly played into that, though perhaps endorsement a little bit of a stretch, because Griffin basically just said hold your nose and vote Galloway, because establishment parties and media deserve a kicking, something we on the left wouldn't disagree with, looking at the state of the Tories and Labour. But being opposed to Sunak and Starmer, well, it hardly makes you the fash, does it? That said, for some bizarre reason, LBC, Andrew Marr's show, decided to give Trump cheerleader and very much far-right nasty Steve Bannon a platform the other day, and Bannon had this to say about Keir Starmer.
The next election, very likely to lose. What's the Trump campaign view of Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership now?
I've always been very impressed with Sir Keir. I'm not a Labour guy by a long shot, but I've always been very impressed with him.
He's impressive, is he? The only thing that's impressive about Keir Starmer is the length of list of lies he has said and largely got away with. After 4 years of leadership of the Labour Party, I must have blinked and missed Keir Starmer's moment of impressiveness. When did that happen? What was that over? What impressed you, not being a Labour man, as you stated there? Although I suppose that answers itself, really, doesn't it? Because Keir Starmer isn't a Labour man either. Was it the purging of the left that got you going? His treatment of a genuine lefty like Jeremy Corbyn? His police state favouring, genocide supporting, democracy assaulting proclivities? Is that what gets the juices flowing for Steve Bannon? There's a lovely thought. Starmer turned Labour into an ever more right-wing entity, actually to the right of the Tories on a whole number of fronts. Is that what has impressed you? This should frankly terrify and horrify people, actually, that the brains behind Donald Trump, as Bannon is widely regarded as being, or has been, is praising the Labour leader right now. And if you were bashing Galloway over Nick Griffin, but you aren't equally hammering Starmer here, having received far more overt praise from Bannon, then you're a bloody hypocrite. Galloway is mixed with Bannon too, after all. You can't make exceptions. Steve Bannon was Donald Trump's election strategist from 2016. He's the former chairman of the hard-right Breitbart News, which, as the Times of Israel reported at the time, was an outlet steeped in conspiracy theories that has featured the white supremacist anti-Semitic ideologies of the so-called alt-right. Jewish advocacy group and also very much pro-Israel Anti-Defamation League said of Bannon's appointment to Trump's administration that it is a sad day when a man who presided over the premier website of the alt-right, a loose-knit group of white nationalists and unabashed anti-Semites and racists, is slated to be a senior staff member in the People's House. Well, isn't he just? Bannon's hung out with the world's far right, from Viktor Orban to Nigel Farage to Marine Le Pen. He even called Tommy Robinson a hero. So all of this ought to be making Starmer rather uncomfortable. It should be. And I'm sure would be, if our pathetic media had bothered to pick up on this and run with it, because If an endorsement like that had come Jeremy Corbyn's way, well, you can bet your bottom dollar they would have been screening that day in, day out all week long. It's a great pity that Boris Johnson, who also had links to Bannon, wasn't picked up on that as well, wasn't it? Again, if you can criticise Johnson for that but not Starmer now, then you are again a hypocrite. Cue the non-existent rage and condemnation of the Keir Starmer fan club, waiting for that Corbyn endorsement from Bannon that will never come, of course, or desperately scrabbling it around for a but Corbyn moment, because I can completely believe that that's what they're doing. He very much does still live rent-free in their heads. So what does impress Bannon about Starmer then? The unprecedented level of betrayal of all those who supported them into the position they are in? That would surely be one. Trump very much did that. Bannon is also a convicted criminal. It must be some pull to be drawn to a former director of public prosecutions. I'm not sure everybody was necessarily aware of that. Keir Starmer hardly ever mentions it, of course. Perhaps it's more to do with both Bannon and Starmer's relationship to anti-Semitism, in which case, given one has been accused of it multiple times, as that Times of Israel article noted, and the other, well, he's weaponised it for his own ends, conflated it with Zionism and support for Israel as well, causing a great many offences to a great many people, especially in Jewish communities across the country. That authoritarian streak at the expense of others, as we're seeing more of now, as Islamophobia becomes more prevalent, is treated as less important than anti-Semitism, more weaponisation of racism, but which has punished Labour, especially with that backdrop of their unequivocal support for Israel, as we saw in Rochdale, which resulted in George Galloway's by-election win, widely accredited to being the major point that led to Galloway's victory there. Bannon actually wasn't even the only nor first hard-right endorsement for Starmer, you might be surprised to hear as well, as last month, when Shamima Begum's latest appeal to have her citizenship returned to her failed, but was ongoing, Jacob Rees-Mogg, of all people, actually advocated for a return. Jacob Rees-Mogg, what was that about? Something I actually happen to agree with, because fundamentally she's British-born. Therefore she is our issue to deal with, and if you refuse to accept that, well, you're standing on dodgy ground, because what other reasons could government strip people born in this country of their citizenship then? Or are we okay because we happen to be white? However, this elicited a response from another of our homegrown knuckle-draggers, the leader of Britain First, Paul Golding, who tweeted out, "Typical Tory tosspot. So out of touch it's incredible. The Tories need to be electorally annihilated. Vote Labour in November." Well, the general election date alluded to there has not yet been confirmed, but it wasn't all that long ago that Golding put out a video threatening to turn the Britain First cannons on anyone who criticised Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, how the worm has turned. What happened, Paul? Starmer more appealing to you now? More appealing than Jacob Rees-Mogg? Ugh. Well, clearly, if you're telling people to vote for them, that must be the case. Galloway might have earned himself a right-wing endorsement of sorts, but nothing as full of praise as Starmer just got from a far worse individual as Steve Bannon. And as much as Galloway also has that connection to Bannon too, he was right when he said the Tories and Labour are two cheeks of the same arse. And this is fundamentally why he won in Rochdale. Threats to that Tory-Labour status quo is what we all need to be backing now. And there are numerous better candidates than George Galloway on offer, as this video recommendation here will tell you all about. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Hamas have turned down a ceasefire, we're being told. So the media spins stories like our unelected Foreign Secretary David Cameron, for instance, apparently urging Hamas to accept the hostage deal, saying to them, "We need a permanent, sustainable ceasefire," as if it is Israel putting that on the table, when it is Netanyahu that has repeatedly refused such ceasefires, not wishing them to be permanent, temporary only so they can carry on annihilating Gaza, not wishing to release the hostages the Israeli state holds either. Many times more than the hostages still held by Hamas. Hostages that Israel are so desperate to rescue, a great many of them have of course died by Israeli hands. Joe Biden, we're also being told, has been fighting for a ceasefire too, except it is he and his representatives at the UN Security Council who have vetoed no fewer than on 3 occasions now the very ceasefire we could have had. The US have been the ones blocking that. The media are desperately trying to spin it that Hamas this time are the ones who have turned down the ceasefire, to blame them again, to exonerate and excuse Israel. But the truth of it is, it was them that brought the deal to the table. So why would they veto their own ceasefire plans? Right, so if it was Hamas's plans on the table, how come the media is getting away with saying it is Hamas who have walked away then, Damo? Well, it's probably because Hamas did indeed walk away. Not quite in the way you think. Not the way the media are portraying, certainly. Not from the negotiations, as it turns out, because they are set to continue. Hamas representatives were meeting in Cairo to hammer out a 40-day ceasefire before the holy month of Ramadan begins. They've left Egypt. That's what they've walked away from. Egypt. In one of those, I need to go into the desert and scream for 5 minutes moments, because this is what trying to negotiate with Israel, I can imagine, does to you. But even more so when you weren't even negotiating with Israel, because Israel actually couldn't even be bothered to turn up and attend. Here's an excerpt from Al Jazeera's coverage. Hamas says its delegation has left Egypt, but talks on a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip will continue next week until an agreement is reached with Israel, whom the Palestinian group says has thwarted mediators' attempts to broker a deal before the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Hamas's delegation left Cairo this morning for consultation with the leadership of the movement, with negotiations and efforts continuing to stop the aggression, return the displaced, and bring in relief aid to our people, a Hamas statement said on Thursday. Senior Hamas official Sami Abu Zuri said Israel had been thwarting efforts to conclude a ceasefire mediated by Qatar and Egypt during 4 days of talks in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Abu Zuri said Israel was rejecting Hamas's demands to end its offensive in the enclave, withdraw its forces, and ensure freedom of entry for aid and the return of displaced people. There was no immediate comment from Israel. Israel did not send a delegation to these recent negotiations, during which representatives from Hamas, Qatar and Egypt tried this week to secure a 40-day ceasefire in time for Ramadan, which begins early next week. The agreement would see captives being held by Hamas and other Palestinian groups in Gaza be exchanged for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Reporting from occupied East Jerusalem, Al Jazeera's Hamza Salhut said, "This round of talks has concluded with no substantial answer or solution for a ceasefire or pause in the fighting." It is worth mentioning that the Israelis themselves chose not to send their own delegation to Cairo for this round of talks because they were hoping to receive a list of names of all of the captives who are alive and currently being held in Gaza, Salhut said. Hamas said meeting this Israeli demand is impossible without a ceasefire because captives are scattered across the war zone. According to Salhut, there were reports indicating there would be another round of talks next week. So, functionally, no agreement could be reached between Egypt, Qatar and Hamas because Israel were not part of the discussions, had refused to go, because they wanted a list of surviving hostages, which, given how spread out they are now, has been impossible to provide without a ceasefire first. Israel are also still refusing to leave Gaza and allow people to return to what is left of their homes, playing into many narratives that Israel are still hell-bent on seizing Gaza for themselves. Everything is once again at an impasse because Israel won't do anything unless they get things all their own way. They want their hostages back, but they won't leave Gaza. They're all take, there's no give, there's no compromise, therefore you can't negotiate like that. There are some 130 Israeli hostages still held in Gaza as far as we know. Israel holds some 7,000 Palestinians in their prisons. People who, if released, would have to be permitted to return home. And once they have, that's more Palestinians that would have to be removed from Palestine if Israel is to take over the Strip. Israel have gone to great lengths to prevent people returning home at every turn of this conflict that's been ongoing since October 7th. Israel are always loath to let them back for that reason. We know they want the land, but without the people that come with it. Fundamentally, without Israel's presence, they wasted time and effort when they showed no intention of coming to a ceasefire agreement. And let's face it, even if they did agree to it, the question of whether they'd stick to it is another matter entirely, because Israel have a very poor track record of doing so. Here's what Hamas were actually proposing by way of a ceasefire deal, according to independent journalist Suleiman Ahmed, who's posted it onto Twitter. A ceasefire in Gaza 1 week before the start of the implementation of this deal. Clear Israeli acknowledgement of withdrawal from Gaza with international guarantees to achieve this withdrawal. No humanitarian truce, which is what Israel want, but rather a cessation of aggression on Gaza entirely. A permanent ongoing ceasefire, in other words. Freedom of movement in Gaza and allowing all displaced persons to return to their homes and areas without any conditions put upon that. From the first day of implementing the deal, aid will be allowed to enter all areas of Gaza without segmenting it into security squares, and I dare say without settlers blocking it from getting in. After the first week of the ceasefire in Gaza, the exchange process of hostages would begin, with Hamas not objecting to it being in installments and with international guarantees that Israel will not violate these agreements. Who's going to play peacekeeper then? Because nobody's volunteered so far, have they? Absolute rejection of allowing any released detainee outside Palestinian territories, and each is released in their own region. Release all detainees from the Shalit deal, who were rearrested as a breach of the deal previously, numbering 57 detainees without being part of this deal. Detainees from inside Israel and Jerusalem are an essential part of the deal, and we do not accept an Israeli veto on this criterion, so we'll have who we want, thank you. And in that vein, Hamas and the resistance factions will provide the names of the first batch of Israeli captives 48 hours before the exchange execution, without pre-arranged lists for the number of captives and bodies, as the counting process will take more time if the war stops. Hamas for the first time presented a list of names to be the first batch for the exchange process, and it was determined as follows. 160 detainees with the highest and oldest sentences, starting with the following names: Marwan Barghouti, Ahmed Sadat, Abdullah Barghouti, Ibrahim Ahmed, Abbas al-Sayed, and the rest of the names in the list according to precedence and judgment without regard to faction or geography. All women, regardless of their sentences, faction or geography. All patients, regardless of their sentence, age or identity, and this clause is titled Prisoner Walid Daka. Elderly individuals, with the definition of elderly being 60 and above according to international standards. All children and minors, regardless of their sentence or identity, with the age limit defined as 18 and below according to international standards. After completing the first batch, we move on to the second batch amidst a comprehensive agreement to ceasefire and achieve the complete withdrawal of the Israeli army from the Gaza Strip and the opening of all crossings to allow all aid to reach the people of the Strip without Israeli control, and without achieving this, we will not proceed to the rest of the batches, which include bodies. It's not, in my view, an unreasonable list of demands. But without Israel showing up to even discuss it, how is it supposed to get anywhere? And why is international political and media consensus so intent on blaming Hamas for walking away when Israel never even showed up? It's really dishonest. It's very unhelpful. It doesn't lead to a ceasefire, and all it does is continue further pathetic attempts to frame Hamas as the only ones ever at fault for there being no ceasefire. It takes both sides. So where is that condemnation of Israel then? It's not even happening. Hamas want a permanent ceasefire and withdrawal from Gaza by Israel. Israel just wants another humanitarian pause they undoubtedly wouldn't stick to, because when have they ever done so previously? The prioritization of hostage releases is sensible. Aid and infrastructure repair, along with the return of people to go back where they wish in their lands. We really are only talking bare minimum stuff here, surely. People in Gaza are dying right now because aid isn't getting in. And throughout all of this, Egypt and Qatar aside, special mention for South Africa as well, of course, going down the legal route, where is the rest of the world in all of this? When the media says it is Hamas rejecting a ceasefire, they're lying. Israel rejected the ceasefire. Hamas brought a ceasefire deal to the table. Not excusing what they've done in saying that at all, but certainly not excusing the much worse ongoing actions of Israel since October 7th either. Israel only ever want temporary stops so they can resume annihilating Gaza and the people there afterwards. Because unless this ends with no more Gaza and no more Gazan people, Israel really do not appear to be interested in any other solutions. And until more countries get that message and their leaders take action accordingly, things will only continue to deteriorate. The genocide continues to be ignored. Starvation is very much one immediate issue, especially in Rafah, where much of the Gazan population remain trapped. Once again, it is South Africa taking Israel back to The Hague over this, though. Third time. And you can find out all about that story on this video recommendation here. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the Prevent Programme, the Labour set-up organisation, Tony Blair era agency designed to prevent, as the name implies, radicalisation of our citizens by harmful ideologies as they deem harmful, has produced a document in line with the Tories' decision to effectively widen what they deem to be extremism in this country, what is regarded as radicalisation, in a blatant bid to actually shut down opposing political views now, effectively lumping them in as just as much of a threat to British society as a sort of grooming we saw by the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. By widening the scope of what is deemed extremist in the way they are, whether you agree with these ideologies or not, and we're talking about such things as socialism or communism or anti-abortionism here, then it all starts to look more like a clampdown on opposing views to that of the narrow Thatcherite establishment views, and for entities built on, for example, socialism, like the NHS or the trade union movement, where might it leave them? Prevent has always been skirting the lines of shutting down freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It has always disproportionately affected ethnic minority groups, so is an inherently racist body. But far from the Tories being potentially the biggest arbiters of this, Labour, if they get into government come the next general election, could be far worse. Because despite a key Labour figure's recent glaring admission, Zionism isn't getting added to Prevent's list of banned thought. Right, so I've been meaning to do a proper piece on Prevent for a while. It came up briefly in my coverage of the Rochdale by-election since Labour's candidate, Azhar Ali, whether Labour still claim him as theirs or not, he was Labour on the ballot and he kept campaigning, was a former advisor to Tony Blair on Prevent. It's a Labour creation. It's getting widened in what amounts to an abuse on civil liberties if the Tories act on Prevent's latest documentation, the report done on it, and Labour are hardly likely to reverse this either. They may even be worse, with both main parties certainly to leave something that should, in my opinion, on the list off of it. I'll come on to that in a moment, though, because the attitude of people and communities most affected by the Prevent programme, I think, is actually more important than what Prevent purports to, as the name suggests, prevent, that being anti-terrorism, because it is top-down diktat from government, in effect, on that issue. The effects on said communities, highlighting major concerns over issues such as religious and gender segregation. It talks down to them, it imposes their will on them, it doesn't involve them. All in the name of, we're told, of course, keeping the people of this country safe. But for the last 2 decades the Prevent has been in existence for, it hasn't done that. It has suppressed identities in the name of keeping people safe. It has become the new no blacks, no Irish, no dogs mentality, just given the cover of government backing and legislation. There's a brilliant film by Samosa Media, which they made in conjunction with East London University, called Prevent Film, A Conversation, which does a deep dive into Prevent. This was made back in 2018, so was done in the wake of the London attacks on Westminster and the Manchester Arena bombing. It's on thesamosa.co.uk. I'll provide a link to it as well. But it is very much examining how the Prevent strategy is hazardous to those it affects. It isn't long, it's under 18 minutes long, but it's well worth your time for what it packs in. Part of the description reading, the film, the Prevent programme, A Conversation, highlights a range of views on the Prevent anti-terrorism strategy, touching on issues such as extremism, gender equality, terrorism, Islamophobia, UK foreign policy, Palestine, and freedom of speech. It affects all of this and more. Filmmaker and Samosa co-founder UNWRA Akhtar features in the film, and he said, racism in Britain has been given a green light to recircuit itself and converging on Muslims. It's okay to hate Muslims. Everyone can join in the Muslim-hating bandwagon, and some of it is linked to the Prevent programme. Relevant to very much the goings-on of today, Mr. Akhtar went on to say later in the film, I think one of the earliest own goals and huge mistakes, and the kind of reputational damage it did was immense, was when some bright spark thought it was a good idea to try and use the Prevent programme to shut down Palestinian activism and Palestinian support. And the argument they were trying to develop was that empathy, support, activism for the Palestinians might be a sign of radicalisation, or extremism, or support for religious hatred. So it's nonsense. Rubbish. This is the inherent danger such a system as Prevent represents, because those overseeing it are not impartial themselves, and therefore such a programme is easily weaponised in the name of keeping everyone safe, but going along certain political lines, and certainly at the expense of people of certain religions or certain political persuasions. And although the film doesn't skirt around the fact there are radicalised Muslims, they are the very small and hopefully diminishing minority, and certainly radicalisation is not confined to Islam. Prevent has scapegoated Muslim communities. This is continuing to this day, and that last statement by UNWRA Akhtar that I shared there really does have a bearing on where we are at today, with pro-Palestine marches, one going on or numerous ones going on today, demonstrations, support for Palestine, and massive criticism of Israel being shown where it never has been able to gain mass traction before. Because, of course, we're seeing the atrocities in Gaza unfold on social media on a daily basis. The reputation of Prevent has always been poor. Even the police admit the relationship with the public and Prevent is a fragile one. Fragile being a bit of a generous term, but Prevent has never really formed a significant part in the daily lives and ongoing thinking of most people in this country. And as much as I could do a lengthy video on Prevent all on my own, for one, I'm white and my white privilege doesn't make me best placed, I don't think, to do so. And besides, Samosa Films have done a far better job than I could, and I do absolutely recommend watching what they've done with interest as Prevent comes back into the news now. Again, for no good reason, as the government now wish to expand it and how they want to expand it. Well, as a rotten lefty myself, as regular viewers will know, that in and of itself might now place me in a spot of bother going forward, and others like me, as the Tories now want Prevent to include socialism as an extremist ideology, wanting renationalised public services, wanting investment in our country and all the aspects of our lives that directly affect us, being able to protest for a just cause. Organisers and spokespeople on such things might, under Prevent, now face being taken to task themselves for radicalising others, or that accusation being levied against them. Opposing inequality would apparently become extremist. The human rights advocacy group Rights and Security International have weighed in on this, saying, "For years we have expressed concern about how the government's broad concept of extremism could be open to politicised abuses. It appears that this concern has now been realised through a blatant distinction between how the government wants to treat people on the left versus people on the right under Prevent. Our concern is only heightened by government rhetoric during the past few days that appears to be targeting British Muslims and protesters for Palestinian rights. If extremism can mean anything the government wants it to mean, that's a clear problem for democracy." Absolutely right. And it should terrify us all that they could decide anything they don't like is therefore extremist and therefore bad for the public, and therefore if you carry on spreading such lines and such narratives and such ideas, then you'd be an extremist. It is absolutely government abuse of the Prevent programme. Where will that end? Preventing anything that the government of the day doesn't like, as they remain eternally right-wing, narrow-minded, and no matter who is in power, nothing ever changes? Well, we're looking at that already. There's no difference between the Tories and Labour, but these expansions to Prevent would attempt to lock that in. The report into expanding Prevent looks at socialism and communism and labels both as united by a set of grievance narratives which underline their cause. The grievance being, we don't like how the country's run, we want change, and that's enough in and of itself to warrant being called an extremist. And to Prevent, of course, anyone in a position of responsibility is required to report any sign of radicalisation under the terms of the programme to Prevent. Will a student, for example, walking through a university campus singing, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," be a sign of radicalisation now then? That's essentially where we're at, isn't it? Because this move is a blatant move to shut down political debate and representation by a programme already on its backside, as far as trusted it goes. But even more dangerous than what the government want to see included under the terms of Prevent as extremism is what they will ignore. Because if you want to talk about radicalisation, particularly the most vulnerable young minds still being shaped, then you need to watch this.
In my current job, and every time is hugely moving and very enjoyable for me. But so 2005, I get invited, and I turned around to Jeremy Newmark, who I think was already working for the JLC then, but it was his exact same generation of me in student politics. He had been running UJS when I've been running Labour students. I was like, why didn't you take me then? Why didn't UJS take me? They were always taking groups of student leaders on study tours to Israel. And why? I was like, why did I have to wait till 2005, until 12 years after I graduated? And Jeremy was like, well, when we put together the list of who to take, you were so outrageously pro-Zionist that we thought it was a total waste of our money to bother taking you to Israel, because the idea was to get people on side that were not already on side. So that was why it took me rather a long time to get there.
That, in case you didn't know, is Labour NEC member and director of the Israel lobbyist group We Believe in Israel, Luke Akehurst, talking about how beautiful it is every time he goes on a Zionist jolly to Israel, talking about university leader study groups being taken to Israel by the Jewish Leadership Council, and admitting that he wasn't taken as a student, only going so many years later because he was already outrageously Zionist, and it would have been a waste of their money. So the reason for these student trips to Israel is to basically radicalise students then for Israel's own interests. Did you notice when Luke Akehurst nearly said convert them? He did just correct himself in time, but I picked it up, did you? Now, Akehurst was finally taken in 2005, he said, well after he had graduated 10 or 12 years later. So this radicalisation by Zionism has been going on for decades then. And you wonder why so many people who have got themselves into positions of power in the years since are so overtly pro-Israel. Is this not the very definition of radicalisation, especially in light of what we are all witnessing now, what Israel is doing in Gaza now, and has been across the occupied Palestinian territories for decades, and most importantly, why it thinks it can get away with it using that self-defence narrative all the time? Why do so many politicians and organisational leaders still, even now, back Israel in spite of public opinion? Is the dangers prevent Warnov not already being shown as a result of radicalisation of the generation now in charge, though of course those responsible are being kept out of Prevent's remit by people, perhaps, possibly, you look across our political spectrum now at all the people who have got pro-Israel links or have been heavily lobbied by the Israel lobby, are they not the very people that Prevent are supposed to be picking up? Akehurst is Labour, not Tory, and all of this expansion is being done by the Tories. It's okay to say that. But they'll probably accuse Keir Starmer of being a lefty extremist. Oh, how those of us who are actually left would laugh at such things, laugh at their desperation, frankly, if they went there. But Starmer as Prime Minister, with oversight for this himself at that point, could well be worse. Everything being done for the Israel lobby now, and that has been done within the Labour Party in the name of clamping down on anti-Semitism, how it has been weaponised. Well, under Starmer, under Prevent, well, that could be rolled out as law across the country. He could be even worse with Prevent than the Tories are now. I firmly believe he's far more authoritarian than Rishi Sunak is, and is utterly bought and paid for by the Israel lobby. He owes far more to them. They'll much prefer him to Sunak, and Sunak is completely acquiescent to them already by his actions regarding Israel. Prevent has been a blunt racist instrument for some time, with its remit potentially to expand, and as selectively as that is looking, the blunt club that it has always been is going to be hitting a lot more people in a lot more communities, with accusations of extremism where there is none, whilst excusing where it very much is coming from. A lot more people need to get a lot more clued up about the Prevent programme, because it could be coming for a lot more of us before much longer. One example of something it could be becoming more extremist to criticise is the recent invasion by settlers into the north of the Gaza Strip. Did you not hear about that one? Can't imagine why. Get all the details of this on this video recommendation here, and I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so this is a story of two halves, really. One half fairly widely reported, but not necessarily very honestly, and another story widely ignored here in the UK by our media, certainly. But I think there's a connection here. On one hand, we have news that the US and others are planning to build a port in Gaza, by which they can deliver aid straight to the Gazan population without having to deal with settlers and other Zionist ideologues blocking the aid on the road in order to starve the captive Gazan population to death. On the face of it, this is a good idea. It'll get aid in. Why they need to build a port? It's being sold as temporary, but why build any sort of port just to deliver aid via the sea? Gaza has a beach, why not just send it at the beach? The other less well-covered story is that of a road that has been under construction from one side of Gaza to the other by Israel. The claim here is that it will enable Israel to deal with threats arising more readily in Gaza in future. It would require them to maintain a foothold in the Strip, and it would potentially lead very conveniently to, well, this new port perhaps. Right, so I know I'm far from being alone in eyeing up this proposition of a new port in Gaza with a great deal of scepticism for more than one reason, just for the purpose, we're told, though, of delivering aid to Gaza. Although that would, of course, be a game changer for the people there right now, surely, wouldn't it? Well, I've got reservations about how Israel would permit said aid from said port to travel to Rafah, for example, in the south, and to those northern areas, to those people who have survived the recent Flour Massacres. However, given America's failure to even be able to airdrop aid without managing to kill people, the sea route is probably preferable now, isn't it? Thing is, it's not. It's so completely and stupidly unnecessary for that reason that there has to be an ulterior motive here. There are no fewer than 7 crossings into Gaza by road. If Genocide Joe really wanted to get aid in, he could do so with just a word. There are aid trucks queued up at crossings being held up by settlers, laughing and cheering at doing their part to prevent aid into Gaza. Such sick scenes of them waving Israeli flags and dancing about it and cheering. So how about, instead of wasting money on a port, you just send a humanitarian task force to the Rafah crossing? This is where most of the Gazan population is now. Dare Israel to stop you and escort that aid in. There are some 1,500 trucks holding some 30,000 tons of aid on that border that can't get it in. Just send a force to get it in. Why is that not the obvious aid solution? Surely that's the easiest way of doing it. Apparently Biden is sending 1,000 soldiers to oversee the construction of this port, so why not deploy them elsewhere to these crossings to get aid in right now, not after your port is built? Because how many more people are going to starve whilst waiting for your port to be built? 60 days they reckon it'll take to build this port, and once built, who will be in charge of it and who will be allowed access to it? Because the Gazan people get shot at on their beach, they've been banned from having a port of their own all this time. They won't be allowed near it, will they? So who is it really being built for here? Think about it. The entire western side of the Gaza Strip is a beach. It's the Mediterranean coast, from which they are stopped from fishing, stopped from accessing trade via sea from. They have never been allowed to have a port before, so why all of a sudden is the US able to build one without Israel seemingly complaining about it? Will Israel be running it, or the US? Will the US control it while saying Israel do? That'd be typical, wouldn't it? Will the Gaza people be able to use it, or are they not meant to be a part of the future picture still? Very much how many in Israel would like it. Well, I'd argue that the reason Biden won't deal with trucks stuck on the borders is because Biden has lost control of his Israel project, but still isn't willing to act accordingly and take them to task and show some force or threaten sanctions until the trucks get in. Stop letting their people block the trucks. It's a very, very simple thing, surely. I don't believe this port will prove to be temporary either. There will be excuses made to keep it open. You don't make temporary ports. But equally, I don't believe it's being built for the purpose of aid either, at least not in the long term. As I said, I think Biden has lost control of Netanyahu. But this port is getting a pass because Israel are the ones really set to benefit from it, as are the US. It certainly won't be the people of Gaza, who have always been prevented, as I said, from having a port before. Now, a lot of people are conjecturing that this will give the US and Israel access to plunder Gaza's gas field, just offshore. However, Israel already have ports of their own alongst the Mediterranean coast, and they have already granted drilling licenses to the likes of BP in this area. They don't need a port in Gaza at all for this. They can carry on regardless without a port in Gaza, and it's a red herring in my view. There's a far more pernicious reason behind this, I feel, which brings me on to the second half of this video. And this concerns a road that Israel have been building across Gaza, which has gone virtually unreported. They've been building it for weeks, but which has now divided the Gaza Strip clean in two right across the middle. This road, again, we're being told is temporary, that could last for years, and is being called the Netzarim Corridor, named after a former Israeli settlement in Gaza, so thumbing the nose at the Gazan people here again as well, whilst destroying buildings north and south of their road to a distance of 380 metres, creating a buffer zone where nobody can therefore get within that distance of this Israeli road without being spotted and dealt with, as I dare say we all know how Israel would. The claimed use for this road is that it will allow Israel to retain a military presence, something they are repeatedly being told they are not allowed to do, a repeated sticking point as this is in any ceasefire talks, because Israel, now they are back in Gaza, frankly have no intention of leaving it again. A road across the very centre of Gaza divides potential insurgents, prevents them organising across the strip, isolates them, and puts all the main settlements in Gaza within striking distance. However, my issue with this reasoning is that the IDF are not allowing any Gazans to return home. At what point will the people of Rafah, where most of the Gazan population now is, be able to return north to rebuild their lives under this Israeli oversight from this road? Too many in Netanyahu's cabinet want that land for Israel, and they threaten Netanyahu's grip on power if he displeases them. So I don't buy this reason for the existence of this road, and if that road doesn't have access to this US proposed port, well, I will eat my shorts. With the southern port of Eilat blockaded by the Houthis in Yemen, it has become a virtual ghost town. An additional port in the Mediterranean, with a road infrastructure across Gaza, would certainly help with getting supplies not into Gaza, but back into Israel. Especially supplies from the US. And given the US are the ones stumping up the cash to build this port, and despite it being in violation of Israel's 17-year blockade of Gaza, being permitted to have a port, this has got to be something of mutual benefit to both the US and Israel. And it just seems to me to be another excuse under the guise of ordinary goods and supplies to covertly supply arms to Netanyahu's regime. Biden isn't going to this trouble for humanitarian aid. The money's not in it. Not when it would be so much easier to police the crossings as well. This is about something else entirely, with so much focus on arms being delivered to Israel by the US, by air notably, likely from RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus, British air base that the US are known to be using. Arms can now be delivered by sea. Trade can be conducted by the US and UK, avoiding Houthi involvement entirely, they who are targeting US and UK ships now. On a level, Israel's Mediterranean ports either can't handle or can't do so without being observed. Because with Gaza effectively being a military zone, and this port certainly would be, nobody would know what exactly is getting in via that port. I can think of no other logical reason for going to the trouble of constructing a port and this road, except for this. For the West to supply Israel with who knows what, without anybody knowing. They can readily get into Israel fast. I sincerely hope to be proven wrong. Meanwhile, if you still think this port could be for gas and oil access in Gaza, the issuing of licenses last December by Israel to steal those resources in effect, which don't belong to them, I covered here in this video recommendation. It just doesn't stand up though. It's too blatant to steal Gaza resources and then rub it in by transporting it across Gaza into Israel, when it can just travel to Israeli ports capable of accepting it, so it never has to leave a boat in effect. It just doesn't make sense here. Anyway, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.